Hey, what's up? It's Cute What If. This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku and Bakugou became the Wonder Duo. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. Kirishima told Midoriya not to be so down, insisting that Bakugou did not hate him and explaining that the rest of their friends had detention with Mr. Aizawa, so Kirishima had already told Bakugou Midoriya would come to study. Midoriya protested that Bakugou could not possibly have agreed, but Kirishima confirmed it and ran off down the hall. Midoriya stood in front of Bakugou's door, hand raised to knock, telling himself there was still time to leave. He decided to knock anyway, worrying that if Bakugou expected him he would be really angry. The door opened and Bakugou glared at him, asking why he was there. Midoriya, fidgeting with his fingers, explained that Kirishima had said he would study with Bakugou because the rest of their group had detention. He tried to tell Kirishima that Bakugou would not want him there, but Kirishima insisted. Midoriya offered to leave if Bakugou preferred. Bakugou ordered Midoriya to stop mumbling, rolled his eyes, and opened the door wider, telling him to come in and that he did not have all day. Bakugou added that at least Midoriya would not pester him every 5 seconds for help with the material. Midoriya followed Bakugou into the dorm and could not help but smile when he saw an All Might poster on the wall, thinking that Bakugou was as much a fan as he was. Bakugou commented that he did not usually let people into his space. Normally they would knock until he came out. He admitted he did not want 100 pairs of All Might's eyes watching him while they studied. Midoriya blushed and mentioned he had taken some All Might merchandise back home after the first few weeks of school, and Bakugou joked that there were still plenty of posters left. Bakugou sat on the floor with his study materials and urged Midoriya to start. He did not want to be there all night. They began to study, slowly relaxing into a comfortable silence broken by small conversations about homework, class, and Mr. Aizawa. Midoriya laughed as he recalled a time when Aizawa had disciplined Mineta for being disruptive. Bakugou agreed, saying Mineta should have been expelled the previous year, and Midoriya remembered how the group had once confronted Mineta for inappropriate behavior. There was a brief, tense joke about that past incident, and Bakugou let out a small explosive crackle of energy and amusement. He teased Midoriya about using his quirk back then, and Midoriya laughed and denied it, both of them enjoying the easy camaraderie that reminded Bakugou of when they had been kids, before quirks fully changed everything. At one point Bakugou turned serious and addressed Midoriya directly, apologizing for how he had behaved in middle school. He admitted that he had been trying to protect Midoriya from getting hurt because Midoriya had wanted to become a hero without a quirk. Bakugou confessed that his approach had been wrong and that he had said terrible things to try to make Midoriya give up that dangerous dream. Midoriya wrapped his arms around Bakugou and forgave him, telling Bakugou that he understood. Bakugou became distraught, saying he had been horrible and recalling one awful thing he had said in anger. Midoriya, who had known Bakugou since they were toddlers, reassured him that he had not meant it. Bakugou buried his face into Midoriya's hair and hugged him tightly, and Midoriya held him back. They stayed like that for what felt like hours until Bakugou finally pulled away and wiped his eyes. Midoriya smiled and suggested they return to studying, and they moved on to the next subject together. Bakugou shouted a triumphant taunt, celebrating a victory over Midoriya in their late-night video game session. Midoriya protested that it was not fair and wondered how Bakugou could be so good. They had given up on studying for the night and decided to play games and hang out instead. Bakugou had won almost every round except for the one Midoriya won by pushing Bakugou over in the middle of a match. Bakugou had retaliated by tickling Midoriya until he begged for mercy, smirking as Midoriya laughed until tears appeared at the corners of his eyes. Midoriya, calling Bakugou Kaken, mentioned that he was hungry and asked if they could get something to eat. Bakugou glanced toward him without taking his eyes completely off the screen and admitted that he was hungry too, though he did not feel like dealing with crowds. Midoriya suggested a small cafe a few blocks from campus that he had found, mentioning their spicy curry and adding that they also had really good katsudon. Bakugou teased him about his fondness for katsudon, paused the game, set down his controller, and agreed to go. They walked to the cafe and took a table near the back. Fairy lights hung from the ceiling and the place was quiet for a Monday evening. They ordered and sat comfortably, the conversation shifting from homework to memories. Midoriya asked Bakugou if he remembered the festival they used to go to as children. Bakugou recalled having taught Midoriya how to throw a ball hard enough to knock over the milk jugs, while Midoriya countered that he had taught Bakugou how to be quiet enough to catch a goldfish. Bakugou asked why Midoriya brought it up. Midoriya said the festival was returning this year and that many classmates planned to go. He wanted to know if Bakugou would come. Bakugou sighed and admitted that he was coming too, mostly because his classmates would drag him along. Midoriya laughed and suggested Bakugou enjoyed their company despite himself. Bakugou glared and refused to admit it, which Midoriya pointed out sounded like an admission. They laughed together, enjoying the ease of their friendship as if they had never stopped being close. Their food arrived and they thanked the waiter, exchanging nudges when one of them forgot. Conversation flowed between bites classes at UA, classmate schemes, and old memories. They finished eating long before they stopped talking. The cafe's closing time at 9 finally signaled them to leave. When they realized the time, both of them panicked about curfew and sprinted back to the dorms. They ran through the quiet streets, taking turns pulling ahead, each spurred on by the other's pace. When they reached the dorms, Bakugou declared victory in a whisper, and Midoriya protested he had won. Practical concerns quickly followed. They needed to get inside without waking their teacher. Midoriya explained that his dorm was on the 3rd floor and that he sometimes forgot to lock the balcony door. He offered a plan. Bakugou could climb onto his back and Midoriya could use his quirk to hop from balcony to balcony. Bakugou eyed him skeptically but hoped it would work. Bakugou climbed onto Midoriya's back, securing his arms and legs while Midoriya activated his quirk. He moved from one balcony to the next with surprising quietness, and Bakugou found himself impressed by how much control Midoriya's quirk had gained since their first year. They made it to the balcony and landed safely. They slipped into Midoriya's room. Bakugou noted the pared-down All Might merchandise on the walls, mostly replaced by pictures of Midoriya with friends and a few notes about hero quirks. Midoriya remembered he had left some things in Bakugou's room, and Bakugou offered that Midoriya could stay in his room that night so they would not risk being seen going back and forth. They snuck into Bakugou's dorm and changed into pajamas in separate rooms. Midoriya used the bathroom while Bakugou set up a movie on the laptop and made sure there was room on the bed for both of them. When Midoriya emerged, Bakugou patted the bed and invited him to join the movie. They sat close together and settled into a comfortable silence. Bakugou pulled Midoriya closer to keep him from slipping off the bed and covered them with a blanket. Midoriya rested his head on Bakugou's shoulder, both of them content in the simple familiarity of the moment. The movie turned out to be about All Might, and Midoriya's enthusiasm showed as he recited lines from scenes with an earnestness that made Bakugou smile. Bakugou was quietly surprised that Midoriya managed to stay awake for the whole movie. Bakugou shouldn't have stayed up for the All Might movie, but he had expected the nerd to be knocked out a good 10 minutes in. Instead, they both dozed off by the credits. Bakugou set the laptop aside and they fell asleep on the bed. Kirishima, Mina, Kaminari, and Shiro arrived at Bakugou's dorm a little after 7 and found no answer when they knocked. Kaminari suggested that Bakugou might have gone downstairs for dinner, and Shiro reminded them they had already checked and he had not been there. Kirishima shrugged and headed back toward the elevator. They checked the kitchen, dining room, and common space but still could not find Bakugou. Mina complained that she was starving and asked when Bakugou would come down, insisting he was the only one who could cook. Kirishima protested that he could cook too, and Mina challenged him to prove it. She pushed him into the kitchen, put an apron on him, and left him to make something while she and the others returned to the common area. Kirishima rifled through the refrigerator and cabinets, pulled out chicken and pork, and found the rice. He set his attempt on the island with a proud flourish. Mina, Shiro, and Kaminari rushed over and poked at the burnt pieces with skeptical expressions. Shiro suggested they get takeout after one tentative bite. The group concluded that Kirishima could not cook, no matter how much he insisted. Bakugou woke to the morning and noticed Midoriya asleep beside him. He blinked, sat up, and turned off his alarm. The clock read 6 in the morning. He brushed Midoriya's hair out of his face and shook him awake, using nicknames in his usual gruff way. Midoriya rubbed his eyes, sat up, and asked what time it was. Bakugou told him it was 6 and that they needed to make breakfast and get out of the dorms before others were awake. Midoriya offered the bathroom first, and Bakugou said he could go ahead, warning him not to fall back asleep. Midoriya obliged and went to get ready. When Midoriya came out in his uniform, Bakugou smirked at the crooked tie and remarked on it. He stepped in, carefully fixed the tie so it lay flat, and noted that it looked right for the first time. Midoriya pointed out that Bakugou did not wear his tie, and Bakugou replied that he did not need to. He went to brush his teeth and told Midoriya not to go back to sleep. Bakugou made breakfast for both of them, surprising himself by feeling calm through the morning routine. He prepared pancakes, eggs, and hash browns. Midoriya enthusiastically praised the meal and offered to do the dishes. Bakugou stood beside him and said he would dry while Midoriya washed. They exchanged playful splashes of water but kept their uniforms reasonably dry. They walked to class together, chatting and barely noticing those around them. Their early arrival drew shocked reactions from teachers and students alike. Present Mick's expression dropped open until Midnight silenced him with a hand over his mouth to prevent him from making a scene. Bakugou noted it was only 7:15 and class did not start until 7:45, and he explained to Midoriya that arriving early was the best way to avoid the crowds. Aizawa prided himself on being observant, but when the two of them walked into class together, 30 minutes early, he found himself stumped by the unusual sight. There was no screaming, no explosions, no crying, just peaceful conversation that, dare he even think it, sounded like a conversation between two friends. Aizawa was lying behind his desk, trying to grab some extra sleep before class when the two of them had walked in. He was not a morning person, or even a day person, and he pinched himself to make sure he was awake. He was awake, which begged the question of what could have happened overnight to cause such a change. Kirishima was confused. Normally he would run into Bakugou leaving the dorms, try to convince him to stay, fail, and end up eating toast. But today Bakugou was nowhere to be seen. Kirishima checked the time and found he was only a few minutes later than usual, so why had Bakugou not shown up? He had not even heard the door open. Had Bakugou been sick? The Bakusquad had been unable to find him all day yesterday, and now he could not be found in the morning. Kirishima went upstairs to Bakugou's room and knocked once, then again when there was no answer. He tried the doorknob and when it would not open, he gently forced the door open. Bakugou was not there. The room was generally tidy, and Kirishima noticed an All Might poster on the wall that made him shake his head. He resolved to find Momo to help fix the door before Bakugou saw it, and walked off with the lingering question in his head about where Bakugou might be. Kaminari did not consider himself unintelligent, although he knew he did not score the highest in Class 1A. Seeing Midoriya and Bakugou walk out of the dorms together, laughing he had never seen Bakugou laugh made him suspect Bakugou had overused his quirk somehow. Convinced Bakugou must have hit his head, Kaminari skipped breakfast and headed to Recovery Girl's office with the single question of whether Bakugou had injured himself enough to think he had seen his classmate laughing. Jairu prided herself on her hearing and on having Momo as her girlfriend. When she heard the sound of video games coming from Bakugou's dorm, she was shocked. The voices were definitely Bakugou's and Midoriya's, and they were definitely coming from Bakugou's room. Instead of inserting herself into others' business, she decided to visit Momo for cuddles and to ask whether Momo had any of those really good cookies left. Class began as normal. Students filed in and found friends to talk to in the few minutes before the bell. Aizawa remained curled in his sleeping bag on the teacher's platform. The only oddities were that Midoriya was not rushing in 1 minute before the bell and that his tie was tied correctly. Bakugou and Midoriya had cut off their conversation early to avoid any unwanted attention when Ida and Tokoyami, who usually arrived third, entered the room. Ida immediately scolded Bakugou for putting his feet up on his desk. He then froze at the sight of Midoriya's properly tied tie and insisted that Midoriya was holding back and must tie his tie correctly every day. Midoriya looked down at his tie and felt his memory flicker back to the moment Bakugou had tied it for him. He had been tired then and had not thought about how the tie had been done, and the memory made him blush. Bakugou snickered softly at Midoriya's predicament, amused that the nerd would now be expected to redo his own tie. Aizawa removed himself from the sleeping bag and announced that they would be going over the development of quirks and discussing the future evolution of quirks. Bakugou felt bored. He already knew much of the material, in large part because Midoriya had an encyclopedic grasp of quirks. Midoriya answered every question correctly and even interrupted once to correct Aizawa. Bakugou watched Aizawa's expression whenever Midoriya raised his hand with an extended explanation and snickered to himself. Most of the class stared at Midoriya with wide eyes. Ida tried to scold him for correcting the teacher but stammered when Aizawa told him to sit. As the lesson continued, Bakugou's mind wandered through the possibilities of what Midoriya might have become without a quirk. He imagined Midoriya working in intelligence gathering, assembling attack strategies, conducting quirk research, or predicting villain movements. Whether as a strategist or a researcher, Bakugou was certain Midoriya had always been destined to work in the hero industry and beyond, even after retirement. Midoriya remained fully engaged in the lesson, often anticipating Aizawa's points and answering questions before they were finished. He enjoyed quirks and found Aizawa's insights fascinating. While listening, Midoriya wondered whether he should ask Aizawa what he thought about a quirkless child becoming a hero, and whether it would be appropriate to raise that question. Would he give the same answer All Might had given years ago if he could not transfer his quirk? He did not have to ask, someone else had already put the question to Aizawa. Uraraka asked Aizawa why some people did not have quirks and whether those people could ever be heroes. Aizawa explained that quirks were an evolutionary trait and that sometimes the genes simply did not get passed on. When asked if someone without a quirk could be a hero, he answered that they could. Midoriya felt as if the world had stopped. Aizawa clarified that people without quirks could be heroes, though not in the same way as All Might. He pointed to Midoriya as an example. Midoriya had an encyclopedic knowledge of quirks and their evolution, and he had studied them exhaustively. He understood weaknesses and strengths and how quirks fit into strategy. With that kind of knowledge, someone could work as an underground hero or a support hero who planned and advised others on how to face specific villains. Midoriya's determination and understanding, even without a quirk, would allow him to be a hero. In short, a person without a quirk could be a hero if they had a skill or talent that helped hero work. Midoriya felt like he was going to cry. Aizawa added that the system was not fair. UA and other hero schools were not set up for quirkless people. The entrance exams and societal expectations meant that someone without a quirk could be capable of heroism and still be kept out of formal training. The possibility existed, but the society made it extraordinarily difficult. Bakugou had known Midoriya would be shaken by Aizawa's words, so after classes he went to Midoriya's dorm. He understood how Midoriya had gotten his quirk and had known his dream even before that. Aizawa's remarks would hit him hard. Bakugou entered the room without knocking, and when he saw Midoriya on the bed with tears on his face, he locked the door, sat beside him, and held him steady. Midoriya reached for the nickname he used, and Bakugou answered that he knew. Midoriya's sobs increased as the realization settled. The teacher who had once called him a problem child and warned he would be useless without control had just outlined how Midoriya's strengths could have made him a hero even without a quirk. Bakugou listened as that sank in. He stayed close, putting a blanket around Midoriya's shoulders and setting his phone timer for an hour so they would not be disturbed. He kept his arms around Midoriya, one hand comforting his back and the other steadying his hair. Slowly, Midoriya's breathing steadied and his eyelids grew heavy. He fell asleep with Bakugou sitting beside him until the timer woke him. When the alarm went off, Bakugou nudged Midoriya awake and called him by his familiar nickname. Midoriya mumbled, asked the time, and panicked about all the studying he still had to do. Bakugou told him to calm down, reminding him they had studied for hours the night before and offering to study together again if it would help. Midoriya looked up, smiled softly, and thanked Bakugou for earlier. Bakugou dismissed it with a short, gruff reply. They slipped to Bakugou's dorm to study without their classmates noticing. As before, studying together felt natural. They talked through the material, anticipated each other's thoughts, and found that working as a pair made learning easier. The sessions were productive, and now and then a memory of something from class would make them both laugh. Bakugou found he enjoyed studying with someone who was focused and driven and who did not ask endless questions. He began to want to do it more often. He suggested making their study sessions a regular thing on Tuesdays and Thursdays to complement the others he already studied with. Midoriya beamed and agreed enthusiastically. Bakugou accepted the agreement with what might have been the smallest, most reluctant smile. From then on, the two rivals of Class 1A became study partners who, when they worked together, could dominate the hero course. Their teachers noticed. Aizawa, who was perpetually on edge about his students, had reason to be alert. They were placed in dangerous situations regularly, and some of them did not always make the smartest choices. Kaminari's ill-advised experiment with a toaster being the kind of reckless silliness that kept Aizawa wary. Still, he was not typically worried about rising test scores. He welcomed them. 3 weeks after he had first seen the two troublemakers interacting with a measure of normalcy, their exam results had climbed noticeably. What had been mid-BS to low-as became mid-as to high-as, edging toward surpassing Ida and Momo in some areas. Aizawa was certain they were not cheating. Those two were not the sort to risk expulsion for a few points, and the improved scores matched the clearer cooperation he had observed. It was also obvious they were getting along better. Bakugou yelled at Midoriya less often. And when they were alone, they even seemed to get along. It bothered Aizawa. He was determined to get an answer about the two students he had repeatedly had to break up. He had dealt with dangerous incidents before, fights that nearly burned down the dorms and skirmishes that had nearly outmaneuvered his capture device, and he maintained a dry, unshaken demeanor, but he still wanted to know what was going on. He called his two problem students down to his office after class. When his door opened, they arrived together and calmly. Bakugou looked unusually composed. Midoriya looked concerned, but Bakugou gave no screams, no glare. He was not smiling, but he did not look angry. Aizawa noted he had never seen that side of Bakugou. Aizawa told them to sit down. Midoriya asked if they were in trouble. Aizawa sighed and said they were not in trouble, but he wanted to know what was going on between them. He pointed out that Bakugou had been yelling at Midoriya less, and that both of their test scores had been rising, praise that was tempered by the fact that their new behavior and performance together had pushed them past their classmates. Aizawa asked what had changed. Midoriya explained plainly that they had begun to study together. Aizawa blinked and asked if that was all. Bakugou confirmed that was it. He said he studied with Shitty Hair and the others on Monday and Wednesday, and with Midoriya on Tuesday and Thursday. It turned out they worked well together. Midoriya added that it had been really helpful, and that he and Kaken complemented each other in study. Aizawa nodded slowly and told them they could go, encouraging them to keep up the good work. Midoriya thanked him and then asked if Kaken and he could use the training grounds on Tuesday or Thursday for extra practice together. Aizawa admitted he had not expected them to train together after all their fights. He allowed Tuesday from 4 to 5:30 and said he would supervise. Midoriya expressed his gratitude, and Bakugou snapped that they did not need supervision, declaring they were at the top of the class and that Midoriya had much better control of his quirk than before. Aizawa reacted inwardly to the unexpected compliment. He explained that he had broken up too many fights between the two of them and preferred to supervise until he trusted they would not seriously hurt each other. Midoriya urged Bakugou to let it go and pointed out that with Aizawa supervising, they could receive tips on techniques and strategy while training. Bakugou stared down at Midoriya, muttered that he understood, and then walked out, with Midoriya following behind him. Aizawa sat back in his chair and wondered what he had gotten himself into. Midoriya challenged Bakugou to come at him. Midoriya and Bakugou had been training for about an hour, and Aizawa found himself impressed. He had expected a train wreck, but in that time Midoriya had managed to get through Bakugou's stubborn habits about opening every fight with a right hook, and Bakugou had already helped Midoriya refine his technique. They balanced each other well. Midoriya's strategies were meticulous and Bakugou's form was precise. Together they produced a storm of power that made Aizawa doubt even All Might could beat them if they worked in tandem. What impressed him most was their rate of improvement. They read each other's movements and thoughts, knew strengths and weaknesses like the backs of their hands, and trained accordingly. Aizawa did not need to offer guidance. They were figuring things out on their own. If they kept this up, they would dominate the class. Aizawa wondered if they might become a hero duo. He intended to bring up the option to the class in a couple of weeks. There would be forms and extra training, but after what he had seen, he had no doubts they could handle it. Aizawa called them over and asked if they had ever thought of becoming a hero duo. Both boys froze. Midoriya reacted with surprise, and Aizawa explained that he would mention the opportunity to the class soon but wanted them to start thinking about it, since there was extra training and paperwork involved. Midoriya and Bakugou glanced at each other. Aizawa dismissed them, telling them to rest. They walked back to the dorms in silence, neither sure what to say. They had showered at the gym and planned to study, but the suggestion of a hero duo kept replaying in their minds. Midoriya pulled Bakugou out of his thoughts, grabbed his hand, and pulled him away from campus toward the cafe. Bakugou asked where they were going, using his usual insult. Midoriya explained that they would not be able to study without talking about Aizawa's suggestion and mentioned that they needed food after their long training session. He suggested spicy curry and katsudon and proposed they talk about the hero duo idea there. Bakugou accepted, still gruff. At the cafe they sat quietly until their food arrived, both unsure what to say. Bakugou broke the silence and asked what Midoriya thought, again peppering his words with a nickname. Midoriya, fidgeting with his katsudon, admitted that when they were children they had wanted to be a duo. Bakugou's brow rose in recognition. He remembered that dream, the idea of being the wonder duo. Midoriya was surprised that Bakugou remembered. Bakugou rolled his eyes but confirmed that it had been their dream. They had planned to be the best hero duo in the world. Midoriya laughed a little and observed that they did work well together. Aizawa had said as much. When they teamed up, not only did their grades seem to improve, but they had made more progress in 1 hour and a half of training than in all their time in class. Bakugou nodded, noting that training with someone whose strategy and technique he knew inside and out had been refreshing. Midoriya added that they also understood each other's quirks well. Bakugou agreed. Midoriya asked shyly if Bakugou wanted to be a hero duo. Bakugou gave a small smile and admitted that he thought he would. They became a hero duo in training, and for the time being only Aizawa knew. The routine continued. Every Tuesday they trained and studied together, spent time playing video games, and simply hung out. Thursdays became study and game nights that often ended with a trip to the cafe for food. During this time Bakugou began to notice unfamiliar feelings around Midoriya. When they were together he felt warm, his heart beat faster, and there was occasionally a flutter in his stomach when Midoriya smiled. It confused him. When he was younger he had assumed such sensations meant he hated Midoriya, but he did not hate him now, so he could not name what these feelings were. He knew he could not talk to Midoriya about it. The feelings involved Midoriya, and Bakugou doubted Midoriya was attuned to his own emotions enough to give a clear answer. He considered confiding in Kirishima, whom he often teased, but feared Kirishima could not keep quiet and might become overbearing. That left his mother, whom he thought of with a gruff nickname. She would be avoidable in the sense that she would not spread it around school, though she would react oddly. Reluctantly, Bakugou decided to go home for the weekend to visit his mother and try to sort out these bizarre feelings. Midoriya experienced the same confusion. He felt strange around Bakugou in a way that was nothing like the nerves of being bullied. It intensified when Bakugou offered a rare smile. It was not fear, and he could not identify the sensations. Not wanting to burden Bakugou with a conversation about feelings he himself did not understand, Midoriya decided to ask his close friend Uraraka for advice. On Saturday morning, as Bakugou headed home, Midoriya invited Uraraka over to his dorm. Uraraka greeted him with concern, noting that he had seemed off when he texted her. Midoriya explained that he had been experiencing odd feelings and hoped she could help. Uraraka asked what the feelings were. Midoriya described getting nervous in a not bad way, feeling butterflies in his stomach, experiencing warmth, and noticing his heart racing at times. Uraraka raised her eyebrows at the list of symptoms. Uraraka leaned forward and asked if the sensations happened around a certain person. Midoriya fidgeted with his fingers and admitted that they did. Uraraka smiled and teased that he must have a crush, then asked who the lucky person was. Izuka's eyes went wide and he said he didn't want to reveal it yet. Uraraka wrapped him in a hug and offered her support, telling him he could talk to her whenever he was ready and asking when he planned to confess. Deku protested that he feared rejection. Uraraka reassured him that if things didn't work out he could move on, and reminded him that he had friends who would be there for him, promising not to tell anyone else. Izuku thanked her. Later, Bakugou announced his arrival loudly, slamming the door and tossing his bag onto the floor. Mitsuki told him to stop shouting, and he shot back that she was shouting too. She playfully tapped his head before pulling him into a hug. She asked why he had come home when he rarely did, and he admitted he wanted to talk about something important. She led him to the couch and sat him down, then asked if he had gotten into any unexpected trouble. He quickly reassured her that he had not. Bakugou confessed that he'd been having strange feelings. He felt warm, his heart raced, and a strange tingling would appear in his stomach. He admitted it was overwhelming at times. Mitsuki could barely contain her smile, and asked if the feelings were tied to a particular person. Bakugou said he felt calm around the person as well. When Mitsuki repeated, him, he confirmed it and asked if she understood what was happening. Mitsuki was stunned. Her son had never opened up like this before. She had long suspected he might not be interested in girls, but she had never expected him to say so out loud to her. She explained that the tingling and the faster heartbeat were often described as butterflies, and that those signs usually meant someone liked another person. Bakugou insisted he had only considered the person a friend, but Mitsuki clarified that she meant a crush. Realization widened Bakugou's eyes, and he let out a sharp, quiet exclamation. Mitsuki nudged him and asked who the lucky boy was. Bakugou finally admitted that it was Deku. Bakugou paced his dorm room, mind racing. He had a crush on the nerd, the same person he had bullied for years. Midoriya had forgiven him, but Bakugou could not imagine Midoriya ever feeling the same way. This was bad. He could stop hanging out with Midoriya and stop studying with him, but he did not want to. He could not abandon him because of his own feelings. He had already pushed him away once. He could either bottle these feelings up and hope they faded, or he could confess. He groaned, thinking there was no right answer. One option might slowly wear him down. The other could end in immediate rejection. He told himself he was no coward and that he could handle a rejection, but this was Midoriya. Rejection from him had been Bakugou's fear since elementary school. If Midoriya rejected him, it would feel unbearable. So Bakugou decided not to tell him. He would continue studying with Midoriya like everything was normal, remain his hero partner, and stay at his side. He would not confess, not now. Midoriya lay staring at his ceiling, struggling with the same dilemma. Kaken had stopped hating him, and if Kaken discovered Midoriya's feelings, everything they had worked toward could be ruined. They might lose their chance to become a hero duo and might lose their friendship. Midoriya could not bear to lose Bakugou again, so he resolved to keep quiet. He did not know how he would keep training and studying with Bakugou as if nothing had changed, but with Uraraka's support he would try. He would stay by Bakugou's side and keep working to be his partner, even if it felt impossible. Kirishima noticed immediately when Bakugou returned to the dorms after visiting his parents. Bakugou looked drained, like he had learned terrible news. As a friend, Kirishima could not ignore it. He knocked on the door and asked if Bakugou was okay and whether they could talk. The door opened and Bakugou stared at him in silence, no shouting, no insults, just quiet. Kirishima stepped inside and asked what was wrong, remarking that Bakugou was never this quiet. Bakugou sat on his bed and, with a sharp tone, insisted he was fine and told Kirishima to leave. Kirishima refused to be pushed off, kneeling to be at eye level and noting that something felt very off. When he heard Bakugou sniffle, he offered to help and asked what had happened. Bakugou admitted he had been trying to sort through some feelings and that he wished he did not know what they were. When Kirishima pressed for clarification, Bakugou mumbled that he had a crush. Kirishima, surprised and supportive, assumed it was a girl at first. Bakugou corrected him, it was a guy. Kirishima reassured him that liking a guy was fine and asked who it was. Bakugou answered that it was someone who would never date him. When Kirishima pushed for more, Bakugou refused to reveal the name. Kirishima urged him to consider confessing, reasoning that if they were already close enough to call each other friends, it probably would not destroy everything if the other did not feel the same way. Bakugou considered the advice as Kirishima left and closed the door. Later that night, Bakugou received a message from Kirishima suggesting he could confess during the festival fireworks. Tuesday and Wednesday dragged painfully slow for both boys. Each wanted to tell the other how he felt, but neither had the courage. Their studying grew awkward, and even Aizawa noticed a change during Tuesday's training session, warning that they would not be able to work as a hero duo if they did not sort out their issues. Bakugou grew frustrated. Midoriya's strange behavior threw them off. To try to regain control, Bakugou moved up their regular study snack time to the beginning of their Thursday session. Midoriya seemed puzzled but agreed, and they walked in silence to the little cafe a few blocks from campus. Bakugou kept sneaking glances at Midoriya, trying to read his expression. They ate their usual orders, spicy curry and katsudon. When the silence stretched too long, Bakugou broke it and told Midoriya that something had been off since the weekend. Midoriya denied noticing, but Bakugou brusquely cut him off, deciding he would speak if Midoriya would not. He admitted to Midoriya that he liked him not just as a friend and, acknowledging how unlikely it was that Midoriya would feel the same after middle school, said he needed to say it anyway. Then he demanded to know what was bothering Midoriya. Midoriya blinked, stunned. He struggled to process the confession, hardly believing his ears. He thought about how close they had come and how easily their partnership and friendship might be damaged if he reacted poorly. He felt fear and hope at once. Bakugou called him a nerd in his usual rough way, masking the vulnerability he had just revealed. Midoriya's mind raced as he tried to figure out what to do next. Bakugou's gaze was full of concern, and Midoriya could see the fear behind it. Bakugou was afraid of being rejected and afraid to learn what was wrong with Midoriya. Midoriya realized that Bakugou had just confessed that he liked him. Tears began to well in Midoriya's eyes. Bakugou's eyes widened when he noticed the tears leaking down Midoriya's face. Bakugou rushed to Midoriya's side in the booth, sat down next to him, and tried to wipe them away. Bakugou asked what was wrong. Midoriya, sobbing, asked if Bakugou really liked him. Bakugou said that if the confession was upsetting, he could forget it, that he could get over it, and that he still wanted to be Midoriya's hero partner. Midoriya clutched at Bakugou's shirt and, between sobs, insisted that he liked Bakugou too and had never expected the feeling to be mutual. For a moment they both simply stared, realizing they liked each other but were too awkward to handle it gracefully. Bakugou then pulled Midoriya into a tight hug. After a while, Bakugou called to Izuku. Izuku, sniffling and looking up at him, answered and used Bakugou's nickname, Kaken. Bakugou asked if Izuku wanted to go on a date that Saturday. Izuku agreed enthusiastically. With that, their first date was set. The future wonder duo waited impatiently for the school week to end. Kirishima, Kaminari, Siro, and Mina were walking back from detention after Aizawa had them scrubbing the gym and classrooms for hours. Kirishima stretched his arms up, noting how hard the work had been. Siro twisted his back to crack it and agreed that it had been tough. Kaminari wondered aloud whether Midoriya had been sent to replace them as study buddies for Bakugou and whether he was still all right. Mina declared that they should go check on them. Kaminari hesitated and pointed out that Bakugou might be furious if he found out about the switch or that they had interfered. Mina glared at him and reminded him that he had forced poor Midoriya to tell Bakugou the truth himself, which was why they should make sure everyone was okay. They decided the Bakusquad would check that Bakugou had not harmed the class sunshine. Since Bakugou never let them into his room, they agreed to check Midoriya's, but when their knocks went unanswered they realized they would have to search the whole school. They divided up. Mina announced that she had grabbed some walkie-talkies from Momo and laid out a plan. Siro and Mina would check the classrooms and the 7-story library, while Kirishima and Kaminari would search the outdoor spaces on campus and the cafes and parks nearby. They agreed to meet back in 2 hours and dispersed. Mina and Siro went to the library. Siro complained that the pair could be anywhere inside, while Mina pointed out that the library was the most logical place to find them and teased that Siro might be curious to see what they were up to. Siro deadpanned that he already knew they were probably studying, or that Bakugou had somehow killed Midoriya. Mina rolled her eyes and pushed him into the building. After an hour of searching, they emerged sweating onto the grassy lawn. Siro collapsed onto the grass and Mina plopped down beside him. Mina remarked on how exhausting running through the entire library had been. Shiro snarked that he had known it would be hard and that Mina had forced them into it. Mina giggled and reminded him they still had to check the classrooms. Shiro pointed out that they had already cleaned the classrooms during detention, so Mina suggested checking the dorms and other extra spaces where they might be studying. Meanwhile, Kirishima and Kaminari had been combing the school's green space, checking every nook, bench, and table. Kaminari even searched the trees because he thought Bakugou might prefer to study somewhere private, perhaps even up in a tree to avoid being seen with Midoriya. Kirishima wondered why they were searching the trees when their friends were unlikely to be climbing them. They spent the hour searching the green space and the trees and ended up missing the cafes and parks around campus. When they regrouped, Mina asked what everyone had found. Kaminari reported finding some squirrels, and Shiro bluntly said they had found nothing. Mina frowned and wondered if the pair really had not been anywhere on campus. Kirishima suggested that it was possible Midoriya and Bakugou had not ended up studying together, since he had not actually told Bakugou about the switch. Perhaps Bakugou had rejected the idea and Midoriya was with his other friends while Bakugou studied alone in his room. Mina pouted at the thought that they might have wasted 2 hours. Shiro declared that he had known it all along. With no other leads, the Bakusquad set off for Bakugou's room. Bakugou felt warm. It was 6 in the morning and he should have been getting ready for school, but he chose to stay still with Midoriya resting against his chest. He ran a hand through Midoriya's hair as Midoriya hummed in his sleep, then closed his eyes and let himself drift back, not caring about being late. They woke up 10 minutes before class, hurried into their uniforms, grabbed apples on the way out, and raced up the stairs, arriving a minute before class started. As they took their seats, Bakugou heard Midoriya giggle. Bakugou asked what he was laughing about, using his usual nickname. Midoriya replied that this was the first time they had come in around the time he used to, rather than when Bakugou usually arrived. Bakugou chuckled at that. Aizawa paused to look at them before beginning class. The students moved on to the villains unit. Legendary villains, the quirks different villains used, villain organizations, and some backstories. Midoriya was fascinated, Bakugou was bored, since they had already studied the material the day before. When class ended, Kirishima put an arm around Bakugou's shoulders and teased him about his hair, then asked if anything had happened since Bakugou and Midoriya had come in together. Bakugou said he had slept through his alarm. Kaminari arrived behind them and noted that Bakugou rarely slept through alarms, which prompted Bakugou to tell him to shut up. Kaminari then asked if Bakugou was coming to the festival that night. Kirishima confirmed he was, and that Bakugou would be there too. When Kaminari asked how he had managed that, Bakugou dismissed it as a secret. Midoriya smiled as he watched Bakugou walk away with his friends. He knew Bakugou would never admit how much he enjoyed their company. Uraraka called out to Midoriya and blurted out that he had walked in with Bakugou like friends. Midoriya explained that they had both overslept and happened to run into each other on the way. Uraraka remarked that Bakugou had been nicer to him lately and asked if they were dating, which flustered Midoriya until Ida stepped in and asked everyone to respect Midoriya's privacy and to move on to lunch. When someone asked if afternoon classes were cancelled because of the festival, Midoriya said the school had given them the rest of the day off for relaxation. Uraraka suggested the arcade before the festival, and the group agreed, heading there first. Later, the festival was alive with lights. Food stands lined the park and games, and a few rides dotted the green space. Bakugou linked Pinky with Midoriya so they would walk side by side as the class rushed toward the nearest food stand. Ida reminded everyone to stay in groups of 2 or more and warned them to avoid getting lost or injured, then warned Uraraka not to eat too many funnel cakes and told Kaminari not to short-circuit the power. The students scattered. Ida followed Uraraka and Todoroki, still issuing instructions. Bakugou pulled Midoriya behind a snack cart and glanced over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching. Midoriya blushed as Bakugou guided him to a nearby festival game where you used a toy rifle to knock down ducks on a conveyor belt. Bakugou boasted that he could beat him and Midoriya responded with his usual enthusiasm. They picked up the rifles and began shooting, the electronic scoreboard ticking up with each hit. Midoriya won by a single shot, and Bakugou pouted good-naturedly. They teased each other about the next game, then laughed as they ran from stand to stand, tying wins and hiding behind stalls when they saw classmates nearby. A classmate invited them to the Ferris wheel and Bakugou agreed, remarking that maybe they would be at the top when the fireworks started. The Ferris wheel carried them higher until the box reached the peak and paused. The first fireworks burst across the sky in red, white, and gold, each explosion adding new color. Bakugou found himself watching Midoriya as the fireworks illuminated his green eyes. They shared a quiet, meaningful moment while the fireworks bloomed overhead. Midoriya flushed at the intimacy of the moment. Bakugou and Midoriya avoided the crowd for the rest of the night, finding a quiet spot to watch the remaining fireworks. Afterwards, they headed back to the dorms to watch a movie and play video games. Kirishima greeted Bakugou with a loud, affectionate nickname and hooked his arm around him as they entered the classroom, asking where he had been the previous night. Bakugou pushed Kirishima away and told him to get off, dismissing the question by saying he had won prizes at the carnival games and gone back to the dorms early. When Kirishima pressed him, Bakugou said he had been bored and thought the festival was stupid, then let a few small explosions flicker in his hands to make his point. Kirishima stepped back with his hands up and laughed it off. Aizawa entered the classroom and told them to sit down, reminding everyone that the fun was over and it was time to get back to studying. Kirishima returned to his desk while Bakugou rolled his eyes and Midoriya stifled a quiet chuckle. Kirishima wondered about what had really happened at the festival and whether people were talking about a rumor of a relationship. He and Kaken had not discussed anything like that, and Midoriya preferred to keep his private matters private, so Kirishima set the question aside for another time. Later, Midoriya's friends asked him about the festival, since no one had seen him all evening. Midoriya said he had gotten lost and had somehow ended up at the cat cafe a block away before returning for the fireworks. His friends laughed at the story, and Uraraka teased that they should have kept a closer eye on him. Todoroki did not consider himself a conspiracy theorist. He saw himself as a detective with logical theories. He paid close attention to his friends, their habits, their birthdays, their preferences, and he knew one thing with certainty: Izuku Midoriya did not get lost. Todoroki had learned this on a jogging outing that had gone off course. Midoriya had been the one to lead them home, memorizing every turn and retracing their steps. So when Midoriya said he had gotten lost at the festival, Todoroki knew something did not add up. His suspicion grew, and he found himself watching Midoriya more closely during class. He could not easily talk to him because Bakugou sat between them, something Todoroki resented. When he overheard Kirishima asking Bakugou if he had seen Midoriya at the festival and Bakugou responding with irritation, Todoroki wondered if there was a connection between Midoriya and Bakugou that no one else knew about. The thought seemed unlikely at first. Bakugou and Midoriya did not get along, but Todoroki resolved to get to the bottom of Midoriya's disappearance at the festival. At lunch, Todoroki found a quiet moment to pull Midoriya aside on the roof, a place they sometimes shared for the peace. Todoroki studied his friend and noted that Midoriya looked content, perhaps even happier than usual. Todoroki asked where Midoriya had been during the festival. Midoriya looked surprised and repeated that he had told everyone he got lost, but Todoroki pointed out that Midoriya did not get lost. After a brief hesitation, Midoriya admitted asking Todoroki to promise not to tell anyone that he had met someone at the festival and they had walked around together. Todoroki raised an eyebrow and asked whether it had been a date. Midoriya blushed and stammered in denial, then reluctantly conceded that it might have been a date, but refused to reveal who the other person was. Todoroki narrowed his eyes in quiet determination but let the matter drop for the moment, resolving that he would find out eventually. Either Midoriya would tell him, or Todoroki's detective instincts would uncover the truth. Uraraka considered herself a good friend and could see that Ida was mortified that they had let Midoriya go missing. Uraraka told Ida she did not think Midoriya had actually been lost, pointing out that he ended up at the cat cafe they frequented. Ida insisted that Midoriya had said he was lost and that they needed to take responsibility and do better, though he conceded the possibility that Midoriya might have wandered until he found a familiar place to rest and get his bearings. Uraraka lingered on a different thought. Perhaps Midoriya was hiding something, maybe even something romantic. The idea seemed unlikely at first. Midoriya rarely acted so boldly, but she could not dismiss the possibility. Uraraka knocked on Midoriya's dorm room door to ask him about the festival and his supposed crush, but there was no answer. She spotted Todoroki passing by and asked if he knew where Midoriya was. Todoroki said that Midoriya had mentioned he was going to study, though he noted Midoriya usually studied in his own room. When Uraraka pointed out that Midoriya was not answering his door, Todoroki suggested he might have gone somewhere else to study, and Uraraka guessed the cat cafe. She set off determined to find him but, despite searching everywhere, returned exhausted and collapsed on her bed. She had knocked on every dorm room door, visited every cat cafe, and searched every library, but she could not find Deku anywhere. There was one dorm room left she had not tried. She could not imagine him being there or alive, but Uraraka was desperate, so she knocked on Bakugou's door. Bakugou appeared in the doorway, glaring from the gap and demanding to know what she wanted, calling her round face. Uraraka explained that she had looked everywhere and asked if he knew where Deku was, saying his room was the last place she had to check. Bakugou snapped that she obviously had not looked everywhere, told her to get lost, and slammed the door. Uraraka walked away, thinking she had perhaps just missed him and resolved to ask again tomorrow. Izuku stifled a laugh and told Katsuki that had been mean. Katsuki smirked and pointed out that Izuku was laughing anyway. Izuku insisted that he was not. Katsuki challenged him, and when Izuku tried to protest, he broke into laughter as Katsuki sat up and began tickling him in a playful hold on the bed. Katsuki grinned while Izuku wriggled, trying to free himself. Katsuki eased one hand away from Izuku's sides and used it to steady his friend for a moment, giving Izuku a slight reprieve before continuing. Izuku pleaded as his laughter returned. Katsuki liked hearing him laugh. It brightened his face. After a moment of tickling, Katsuki bent down and pulled back with a fond look. Izuku lay panting and flushed, and Katsuki leaned down again but then simply smiled and stepped back, watching him. Izuku protested that he had already been breathless from laughing. Katsuki smirked and, instead of anything more, lingered with a gentle smile. He teased that from his position he thought he could do whatever he wanted. Izuku flushed deeper while Katsuki smiled down at him. Katsuki released Izuku's hands and then moved to flop down beside him so that they were close. Izuku ran his fingers through Katsuki's hair in a playful motion and giggled. Katsuki teased him about the giggle and Izuku responded that Katsuki's hair was unexpectedly soft for being so spiky. Katsuki told him to be quiet and to stay close. Jairu appreciated her quirk for many reasons, being able to hear through walls, picking up gossip, and generally staying in the loop, but she had not expected what she overheard that afternoon. From the sounds coming through, Bakugou Katsuki and Midoriya Izuku were in the same room, and Midoriya was laughing because Bakugou was tickling him. It sounded like they had shared a quiet, affectionate moment after the playing. Jairu would not have known all of the details if it had not been for the complaints she heard, but the strangest part was that Bakugou had initiated the closeness. Jairu told herself this was new and unexpected and, at first, impossible. She briefly wondered if someone had used a hallucination quirk on her, but she had no signs of interference. That meant Bakugou and Midoriya had actually been close and sharing a tender moment. It took every ounce of restraint for her not to tell the rest of the class. She usually respected people's privacy, but the temptation to share was strong. Instead, Jairu went to Momo's for some tea and company, and maybe one of Momo's very good cookies. The next day Uraraka cornered Midoriya and demanded to know where he had been the previous evening. Midoriya explained that he had found a new cafe to study at after missing his train stop and had not meant to worry anyone. Uraraka said she just wanted to talk and suggested they meet in his room that night. After classes, Uraraka guided Midoriya to his room and shut the door. She pressed him about what had really happened the night of the festival. Midoriya repeated that he had just gotten lost. Uraraka asked if he was sure, and when he affirmed it, she decided she wanted to talk about something else, his crush. Midoriya flushed and tried to change the subject by offering to study, but Uraraka made clear that she intended to find out who he liked. Midoriya protested, but Uraraka teased him and demanded at least one hint. He admitted, after a pause, that the person was cute. Uraraka complained that anyone could be cute and demanded a better hint. Midoriya said the person was smart, funny, and someone he enjoyed spending time with. Uraraka began to rattle off possibilities, wondering if it could be someone in various classes. Midoriya deadpanned that Uraraka was underestimating how many people he had noticed and studied, which made her consider even more options. Uraraka promised to be discreet and declared herself Detective Uraraka on the case. Midoriya groaned and pulled out his phone. He sent a message to Katsuki, telling him that Uraraka was trying to figure out who he had a crush on and that she thought it was a girl. Katsuki felt his phone vibrate as he was finishing a study session with his friends. He replied by asking how Uraraka even knew. Midoriya explained that he had not been sure what his feelings were and had not expected her to bring the topic up again. Katsuki teased that of course Uraraka would notice and added that if she thought it was a girl she was in for a surprise later. Midoriya told Katsuki he would let him get back to studying, and sent an affectionate sign-off. Katsuki replied in kind and then put his phone away, only to discover that the rest of his group was staring at him. Kirishima told him that he had never seen him answer his phone during studying before, and Kaminari said that he looked like he had been smiling. Mina exclaimed that he must be happy about someone and asked if he was dating. Kaminari nudged Kirishima and muttered that Mina probably meant the opposite, but the teasing continued. Bakugou snapped at them and warned that they were not getting away without an answer. Mina demanded to know who it was. Amanda answered. Mina and the others fell silent, then stared at Bakugou in disbelief, accusing him of replying to them. Bakugou confirmed that he had answered and identified the caller as Amanda, then told them to get back to work. He slipped out his phone and sent a final text to Sunshine explaining that Bakusquad had found out he was dating someone and that Amanda had mentioned it. A week had passed since the fiasco about Bakugou being seen with someone. The situation had mostly calmed down, though Mina asked about him at least once a day. Jairu had cornered the two shortly after school one day and told them she already knew. Bakugou tried to intimidate her, but she shook her head and said it was not her place to tell anyone. She only wanted them to know she was aware. That day brought new business. Aizawa announced a break between units and told the class that after homeroom they would have the rest of the day off. Ida protested about the importance of their studies, and Aizawa sighed while explaining that the time was meant for them to consider forming hero duos or groups. He described the forms and extra training involved, handed out informational packets, and left for the teacher's lounge to rest in his sleeping bag. The class buzzed with conversation as students broke into small groups to discuss possibilities. Some thought a duo might work, others preferred to operate solo. Bakugou and Midoriya exchanged a glance before their friends pulled them away. They had already submitted their application and begun training weeks earlier, but they said nothing, planning to let the rest of the class discover the partnership on their own. Later, as they walked out of class, Todoroki asked Midoriya what he thought about being in a hero duo. Midoriya reflected on the many factors to consider: fighting styles, quirks, personalities, and how partners handled arguments. Todoroki chuckled and teased that meant he and Bakugou would not form a duo anytime soon. Midoriya protested that he believed they could make it work if they truly wanted to. Todoroki admitted he might try to form a duo himself, partly to annoy his father, but he also said he was still weighing his options. When Todoroki asked Midoriya about partnering with him, Midoriya considered that they might be a good team but added that he already had plans. Todoroki told him to let him know if he changed his mind and left. Midoriya crossed the street toward the cafe where he and Bakugou had agreed to meet. He spotted Bakugou and waved as he approached. Bakugou slid into the booth beside him, offered a quick side hug, and guided Midoriya inside. They settled into an animated session of planning and training, Midoriya outlining strategies and Bakugou critiquing fighting techniques and proposing new moves. They were working on individual signature moves while brainstorming potential duo techniques. Midoriya suggested an idea about shaping an explosion in a new way, and Bakugou acknowledged the difficulty but agreed it could work with precise timing. Midoriya proposed a smokescreen tactic to approach from different angles, and Bakugou said it would take practice but was feasible. They ended up declaring themselves the Wonder Duo, energized by the possibilities. Meanwhile, the close friends of Midoriya, the Deku Squad, went looking for him around a part of downtown they rarely visited, passing the cafe on the corner. Uraraka fretted over not being able to find Midoriya, insisting he was hard to track down on certain days. Ida urged calm and suggested a reasonable explanation, like studying in a quiet area, while Todoroki trailed behind them, scanning the street. When Todoroki stopped and pointed, Ida and Uraraka turned to see him staring at the little cafe. Todoroki noted that he could see two familiar heads inside, one green and one blonde. Uraraka's jaw dropped and she started to cross the street, ready to hurry in, but Ida grabbed her arm and restrained her. He reminded her that Midoriya deserved privacy and that all they could actually see from across the street were a green head of hair and a blonde head of hair, so barging in was not appropriate. A student insisted that it might not even be them. Another student appealed to Ida, but Ida declined. He ordered everyone to move on and specifically told Todoroki and Uraraka to come along, reminding them that UA had a quiet zone. Todoroki observed that it would hardly be quiet with the Bakusquad around. The Bakusquad buzzed as they sat down in class. They were whispering about Bakugou dating someone, amazed that anyone could put up with him. Their conversation left Bakugou alone for once. The rest of the class watched curiously, wondering why the group wasn't talking to him and why they looked so animated. Mina insisted that the girl had to be in the hero course, which startled the others. Shiro pointed out that there was no Amanda in the hero course. Kirishima suggested she might be from another school's hero course. Mina shot back that Bakugou would have no reason to know someone from another school. Kaminari proposed that Bakugou might have given them a fake name. Mina exploded that she hoped he had not. Todoroki asked why they were worrying over someone Bakugou knew. The Bakusquad answered that Bakugou was dating her, which caused the entire class to react in disbelief. Bakugou snapped at Mina to back off and declared that who he was dating was nobody's business. Kirishima, remembering a conversation, pointed out that when Bakugou had mentioned a crush, he had told Kirishima it was not a girl. Mina demanded to know what Bakugou had said, shaking Kirishima. Kirishima confirmed that Bakugou had said it was not a girl. The revelation settled over the room. Bakugou's gender of the partner was obvious to those who knew him, and the class reacted with a mixture of shock and amusement. Midoriya stifled giggles as jaws dropped. Kaminari praised the joke, and Shiro asked who the partner actually was. Bakugou said that it was for him and the partner to know, and for everyone else to find out when they felt like messing with them. Midoriya held back tears of laughter. He knew Bakugou too well, they would tell the class soon enough, and they were already planning to have some fun with the reveal. Midoriya then asked if the partner was the guy he'd seen Bakugou walking home with the other day, suggesting they had been bringing him to visit Auntie. Bakugou fought to keep a straight face and leaned forward, grabbing the collar of Midoriya's shirt in a staged show of aggression and jokingly threatening to make a scene if Midoriya said anything more. Midoriya raised his hands and assured him he understood. When Mr. Aizawa entered, he saw Bakugou holding Midoriya's shirt and Midoriya with his arms up. The rest of the class looked poised to pull them apart, but Aizawa noticed the mischievous glint in their eyes and suspected the two were up to something. He called Bakugou and Midoriya to stay after class, then ordered everyone to sit down and begin. Bakugou let go of Midoriya. Aizawa could see the laughter hidden behind their expressions and braced himself. Whatever they were planning would likely give him a headache. After class, Aizawa asked the two what they were doing. Midoriya and Bakugou exchanged a look and admitted that the Bakusquad had discovered Bakugou was dating someone. Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Bakugou explained that he had told the class his partner's name was Amanda. The two students looked like they might burst with suppressed laughter at the memory. Aizawa, already feeling a headache coming on, noted that they were dating. Bakugou pulled Midoriya closer and said they were, if Aizawa planned to keep it out of the wider class. Aizawa sighed and told them he was not planning to reveal it, allowing them to go to their next class. Midoriya thanked Mr. Aizawa as Bakugou pulled him through the door. Aizawa let out a tired chuckle and thought to himself that of course the partner was a man. Aizawa was surprised by other pairings as well. He had expected Bakugou and Midoriya to be a hero duo, but he had not anticipated Kaminari pairing up with Shinso. Shinso was moving up to Class 1A the next day after Mineta's recent expulsion. Aizawa had not expected Shinso to pair with the potentially loudest kid in 1A, and he still could not decide whether Kaminari or Bakugou held that title. Though Kaminari's grades had been improving lately, and Aizawa suspected Shinso might have helped him focus, the pair would be an unexpected combination for the field. With a lot of training, Aizawa thought they might make it work. No villain would easily expect an electricity type to team up with someone whose strength lay in mental tactics. Aizawa almost laughed when he saw the duo names the students had chosen. Kaminari and Shinso had picked the purple flashes, an awkward choice that could be changed before they went into the field. Bakugou and Midoriya's duo name, the Wonder Duo, made Aizawa sputter. It sounded like something a child would pick, and he could hardly imagine Bakugou agreeing to it. Still, it was better than the purple flashes. The paperwork for the duo registrations was not difficult. Aizawa usually made the students submit forms a few months before the office deadline so he could avoid extra work if they changed their minds. He would sign and forward the forms to Nizu when the time came. For now, he only needed to schedule Kaminari and Shinsu's duo training. He already trained Bakugou and Midoriya every Tuesday, and now that they had filled out the form, he considered adding another session for them as well. He would deal with the scheduling next class. Shinso did not usually find himself in situations like this. In fact, he never did. Kaminari, one of the loudest students in Class 1, not only wanted to study with him but wanted to be a hero duo partner. Shinso admitted to himself that he did not know if their quirks really suited a partnership, but Kaminari was persistent and, much as Shinso hated to admit it, convincing. Kaminari skipped alongside him, excitedly chattering about how cool they would be as a hero duo. Shinso noticed that Kaminari's smile was oddly addictive and that his constant talking filled a silence Shinso was used to. When Kaminari used his quirk, a ring of electricity lit up his eyes. Shinso reminded himself he was not attracted to Kaminari, he simply appreciated the company. Kaminari asked if Shinso was listening. Shinso apologized and said he had been thinking. Kaminari wondered whether Shinso was thinking about moving up to Class 1A, about their duo, or about a girl, and remarked that he had never heard Shinso mention a girl before. Shinso explained that he was gay and that his thoughts had been on how loud Class 1A would be. He joked that he was going to have constant headaches for the rest of high school. Kaminari immediately pushed back, insisting that Shinso would not get headaches and reminding him that it was their class, not just his. Kaminari then revealed that he was bisexual and that he leaned toward guys, explaining that people tended to assume he was straight because he flirted with everyone. Shinso raised an eyebrow and asked whether Kaminari was serious about being bi. Kaminari confirmed it. Kaminari's expression softened when Shinso shared that he had known he was gay since he was 10 and that his parents had given him up shortly after. Shinso added that his parents had always disliked his quirk and that his orientation had been the last straw. Kaminari frowned and asked why anyone would hate Shinso's quirk, calling it perfect for hero work and noting how effective it could be in hostage situations. Shinso told him that other people had always said his quirk seemed villainous. Kaminari defended Shinso, saying he and Midoriya both saw potential in the quirk and that Midoriya had been asking Shinso many questions about it. Shinso chuckled, acknowledging that Midoriya had indeed been curious and had even had Shinso demonstrate it to test its limits. They walked on in companionable silence for a while, each lost in thought. Then Shinso thanked Kaminari, and Kaminari smiled. Later, Kaminari felt elated. Shinso had joined Class 1A, he had sat with the Bakusquad at lunch while still planning to split time with the Deku, and he had received his first A on a test. He almost leaned in toward Shinso in his excitement but restrained himself. He told himself he was not attracted to Shinso, he simply liked being close to him. Kaminari was also looking forward to meeting with Aizawa-sensei to arrange a training schedule for their hero duo. He was unusually eager for the meeting. Aizawa normally meant detention, not planning. Everything felt perfect until Bakugou and Midoriya walked into Aizawa's office, laughing together. Seeing them laugh at all stunned Kaminari because he could not remember ever seeing Bakugou laugh before, much less be friendly with Midoriya. Kaminari felt like he might have misread everything, but Shinsu's expression confirmed it. Bakugou and Midoriya were going to be a hero duo. Kaminari left the office in a daze, barely remembering the training times they had arranged. He had too many questions racing through his head. Shinso noticed and asked if he was all right. Kaminari blurted out that Bakugou and Midoriya were going to be a hero duo. Shinso observed that Kaminari looked as if he had eaten one of Siro's brownies and said that while the duo news might be a shock, It could not be that big a surprise. Kaminari explained that he had never seen Bakugou laugh and could not recall a time Bakugou had been nice to anyone, let alone Midoriya. Shinso responded that those two were actually together all the time. Kaminari was stunned and asked what Shinso meant. Shinso said that every Tuesday and Thursday, without fail, Bakugou and Midoriya had been going to a little cafe opposite where Shinso worked, and that they had been doing it for weeks. Kaminari gaped, unable to believe it. Shinso added that things between them had been less tense and destructive ever since a detention where Kirishima had arranged for Midoriya to study with Bakugou in their place, hoping to get them to stop fighting and become closer. Shinso admitted he had not expected the plan to work so well. Kaminari remarked that he had thought Bakugou was bad when he first came to the class and could not imagine what Bakugou had been like before befriending Midoriya. Shinso noted that Bakugou was now dating someone. Kaminari scoffed at the idea of a girl dating Bakugou and was then surprised when Shinso said the partner was male. Kaminari reacted incredulously at the idea that Bakugou might be gay, and Shinso replied that many in the class seemed to be exploring their identities. Kaminari urged that if Bakugou was dating someone and had been spending time at a cafe with Midoriya, they should consider the possibility that Bakugou and Midoriya might be dating. He immediately rejected the notion, insisting they could be getting along better without it meaning they were a couple. Shinso reminded him that he had also failed to predict they would become a hero duo. Kaminari doubled down, insisting they were not dating even as the thought lingered between them. Uraraka reached for Todoroki's hand and began singing a cheerful holiday song. Todoroki responded with a dry, deadpan remark. Tsu joined in, taking Todoroki's other hand, and Uraraka tugged at him to pull the group closer. Ida hurried over and demanded that the circle stop. Uraraka refused, insisting on keeping the game going and teasing that Midoriya was not a Christmas tree. The center of the circle revealed Midoriya sitting on the floor, tangled head to toe in fairy lights, ornaments caught in his hair, and a star resting on his head thanks to Uraraka's quirk. Ida ordered Uraraka to untangle him, and she pouted before agreeing. Under Ida's supervision, Uraraka and Todoroki worked together to remove the lights and ornaments from Midoriya. Bakugou leaned in the doorway, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate, and teased that he had expected Midoriya to be wrapped up like a gift. Midoriya bounded over, accepted a cup, and hugged Bakugou briefly to thank him. Uraraka yelled at them to stop the affectionate display because they had a Christmas tree to decorate, and Mina called from the other room that the dorm's common area also needed attention. Kaminari burst into the room with tinsel tangled in his hair and garland draped over his shoulders, ornaments spilling from the box he carried. The others winced, grateful they had bought shatterproof bulbs. Bakugou barked a warning at Kaminari to be careful with the ornaments. Kirishima stepped in and guided Kaminari back toward the couches, apologizing to Bakugou for the chaos. Midoriya knelt to pick up the fallen decorations while everyone exchanged grumbles and laughs. It took 5 hours to finish decorating the dorms. Every time someone placed a decoration, often Kaminari, someone else had to fix it. No one thought it sensible to put garland in the toaster or metal wires near the sockets, so midway through the night Shinso arrived with the clear purpose of keeping Kaminari from starting a fire. The tree was the most chaotic project. The class split into groups over how it should look. One group wanted a carefree, everything-thrown-on approach, another aimed for a red, green, and gold theme led by Momo, and a third pushed for blue, silver, and white under Ida's direction. The carefree crew, mostly Bakugou's friends, was quickly dismissed after Bakugou scolded them. Momo and Jairu took charge of the red, green, and gold vision, while Ida argued the blue scheme would complement the tree. They resolved the dispute by drawing lots, and the red, green, and gold aesthetic won. Kaminari tried to place the star on top and accidentally shattered it, so Momo used her quirk to shape an angel instead. Uraraka floated up to adjust the highest decorations. No one was hurt. By the end of the day, the dorms were festively decorated and intact, which pleased Aizawa enough to bring Eri over for a short visit with Midoriya. The group settled in the common room with the fire crackling and the lights dimmed. A light romantic comedy played on the television while everyone relaxed. Bakugou and Midoriya sat close on one side of the couch, Shinso and Kaminari occupied the other, Jairu and Momo shared a chair, and Todoroki took care to keep his side of the love seat from catching anything on fire, Kirishima dozing against him. The atmosphere was peaceful, a welcome break from homework and training. Bakugou produced a small box from his pocket and offered it to Midoriya. Inside lay a simple bracelet of black cord with 2 wooden beads, each carved with an initial. Midoriya felt moved to tears. Bakugou gently fastened the bracelet onto his wrist. Midoriya thanked him with heartfelt warmth and wrapped his arms around Bakugou in an affectionate embrace, while Bakugou put an arm around his waist in return. Bakugou told him it was nothing, and Midoriya mentioned that he had Bakugou's present waiting in his room. Bakugou replied that it could wait. Midoriya then told Bakugou that he loved him, and Bakugou returned the sentiment. Bakugou was rushing. He had exactly 11 minutes and 41 seconds before he had to pick up Midoriya, and by his estimates it would take another 10 minutes for the brownies to finish and 5 minutes to finish setting up. He had to admit that, as excited as he was for their first official date, he was also painfully nervous. He had spent plenty of time alone with Midoriya on casual outings and study breaks, but this was different. This was a real date. Flowers, candles, the whole thing. He had never been on a date like this before. Maybe a movie would have been safer, at least he couldn't mess that up. Midoriya was panicking too. He and Kaken were about to go on their first official date and he had no idea what to wear. The novelty of the situation made him overthink everything. He settled on a plain gray shirt and black jeans, hoping it would be fine. He glanced at the clock. 2 minutes until Bakugou arrived. When there was a knock at the door, Midoriya called that he was coming and tried one last time to fix his hair before opening it. Bakugou stood there in a plain navy shirt and black jeans. Midoriya thought the matching jeans were a good choice. Midoriya greeted him and Bakugou asked if he was ready before taking Midoriya's hand and pulling him out of the room. Bakugou closed the door behind them and led him up the stairs toward the rooftop. Bakugou whispered for Midoriya to close his eyes, and Midoriya complied, letting himself be guided to a chair on the roof. When Bakugou told him he could look, Midoriya blinked and took in the scene. Bakugou was sitting across from him at a small table with a candle and a plate of katsudon. The roof was lit with candles arranged in a soft circle, and a table a few feet away held other covered dishes. Midoriya choked up at the sight and told Bakugou that it was beautiful, thanking him. Bakugou told him not to cry and then asked if he was ready to eat. Midoriya answered that he was, smiling. They dug into the katsudon. Midoriya claimed that Bakugou's katsudon was even better than his mother's, which made Bakugou swell with quiet pride. Bakugou teased Midoriya about his obsession with katsudon and they laughed together. The brownies were an even bigger hit, rich, chocolatey treats that had been paired with ice cream and hot fudge. Bakugou had brought the ice cream and watched with amusement when Midoriya reacted with obvious delight to his first bite. They talked and laughed well past midnight, eventually giving up on the table and lying on their backs under the stars, using the tablecloth as a makeshift blanket. Bakugou pointed out constellations and recounted the myths behind them, remembering stories of daring escapes and of lost loved ones that had become stars. When Midoriya started shivering around midnight, Bakugou wrapped the tablecloth around his shoulders and told him they were not done yet. Midoriya followed, smiling and asking about Cassiopeia. Bakugou happily explained and led him back toward his dorm. Back at the dorm, Bakugou opened the door to reveal a pillow fort stocked with popcorn, candy, pillows, and blankets. He pulled Midoriya in and they sank into the cushions together, laughing as they settled. Midoriya asked what they would watch. Bakugou suggested a horror film, which Midoriya protested, so Bakugou quickly changed his mind and suggested a family-friendly animated film instead. Midoriya lit up in excitement at the choice. They settled in with the movie, Midoriya leaning his head against Bakugou while Bakugou rested his head against Midoriya's shoulder. Pillows and blankets surrounded them, the light from the screen soft on their faces. They kept a gentle, comfortable closeness, appreciating each other's company. That was the start of a movie marathon, one animated film followed by others, and by the time they finally fell asleep it was past 7 in the morning, still cozy beside each other. Later, when Kirishima knocked at 9:30 and found the door locked with no answer, he left in search of another sparring partner. When Uraraka went by to invite Midoriya to go bowling, she also received no response. Todoroki and Ito were busy studying, so they carried on without him. Midoriya and Bakugou ended up spending the entire day together, alternating between napping, tidying the rooftop when no one was around, and playing video games. Midoriya suggested studying at one point, but Bakugou pointed out that they were already ahead and it made more sense to enjoy the weekend together. They left the rest of the weekend for themselves, content and relaxed. Everything did not go back to normal. Kaminari shook his head, thinking he should have known. He and Shinso had begun their new hero duo training, and it was fascinating to see all the different ways their quirks could complement each other. Even Kaminari had not expected them to work so well together. Kaminari convinced Shinso to sneak in and watch Midoriya and Bakugou's hero duo practice, and what he saw stunned him. Midoriya and Bakugou were excelling in their training. They moved as if they had trained together for years, their motions were completely in sync, their timing impeccable, and it was unnerving how much it seemed like they were anticipating each other's moves. When Midoriya made a slight turn, Bakugou was already ready for whatever came next, and vice versa. It was the most impressive thing Kaminari had ever seen. Shinso was equally stunned, his mouth open and the fatigue under his eyes momentarily gone. Kaminari almost would have laughed if he had not noticed Bakugou about to look their way, which forced him to pull Shinso behind a corner and then hurry him out the door. Kaminari swore in disbelief and demanded to know how it was possible. Shinso admitted he was very glad he was not a villain. Kaminari gushed that they had been perfect and in sync and wondered whether they were somehow reading minds or if one of them had a second quirk. Shinso suggested they were simply that good. Kaminari admitted it would explain why they'd improved so much in class if they'd been training like that. Shinso then suggested taking a nap, and Kaminari agreed. Midoriya and Bakugou walked back from the showers together. Midoriya told Bakugou he thought he had seen Kaminari and Shinso during their practice. Bakugou laughed and said Kaminari had probably dragged Shinso along to see how good they were and had surely been surprised. Midoriya reminded Bakugou that all hero duos in training have a mock battle at the end of the year so Principal Nizu and the teachers could confirm they were acceptable hero duos and so classmates could see their progress. Bakugou raised his eyebrows at the notion of needing confirmation and called it a formality. Midoriya pointed out the more important part: their classmates would see the battle. Bakugou grinned at the idea of showing everyone how good they were and surprising them. Midoriya suggested that they could have some fun by revealing they were a couple at the same time, though he was unsure how Bakugou felt about coming out to the class. Bakugou liked the idea. Midoriya later ran up behind Bakugou with a notebook, calling to him. Bakugou greeted him warmly and gave Midoriya a quick, affectionate kiss on the forehead. Midoriya explained that he had been studying past end-of-year hero duo exams and thought they could start strategizing. He outlined that the exams tended to mix which pro heroes the student duos would face, often choosing 3 to 4 pro heroes for each challenge, and that certain pro heroes had appeared more frequently over the past 10 years: Death Arms, Rocklock, Cementos, Ectoplasm, 13, Gang Orca, and Fat Gum. In more recent years, Hawks, Kamui Woods, and Mirko had become common choices. New heroes generally participated at least once within their first 3 years, so MT Lady might appear. Crimson Riot had made occasional appearances, and with the media attention on their class, he might show up as well. Bakugou listened and nodded as he processed the information. Midoriya continued that, given the attention their class received, many heroes would likely volunteer. Assuming both classes had 2 duos, the exams would need between 12 and 16 heroes. Their teachers had also participated in past exams, so heroes like Present Mike, Midnight, Vlad King, Mr. Aizawa, and even Principal Nizu could be involved. Midoriya suggested considering Endeavor as well. Bakugou pointed out that the organizers would pair heroes whose quirks worked well together, such as Cementos and Rocklock, so they needed to analyze potential pairings and prepare strategies for each. Midoriya agreed that it would take months to work out all possible groupings but that they should identify the most likely opponents and develop adaptable strategies, including a plan for each pro hero that could be altered or combined when heroes work together. Bakugou smirked and said he secretly hoped to face Icy Hot's father, having heard others talk about him. He added that if they faced Endeavor, they should focus on disabling his team before dealing with him. With that, they set to work, strategizing and preparing for the end-of-year mock battle. Midoriya felt relaxed. He and Bakugou had spent the weekend together, and he was still overjoyed from their date. He could hardly believe they had actually gone out, and he did not have to worry about schoolwork after studying so much with Bakugou that weekend. When Mr. Aizawa gave them a pop quiz, Midoriya remained calm. He had studied the material weeks ago and done a few small reviews to keep the information fresh. He even knew the extra credit question from their next unit. There was no stress, and for once an increasingly common state for him, he had no anxiety. Bakugou felt similarly relaxed in front of Midoriya. He had not been running after Kaminari and Kirishima around the dorms or shouting aggressive taunts. He was not dealing with the Bakusquad bringing forgotten homework and whining for hours while he tutored them. Instead, he had spent the weekend focused on a date with Midoriya, and the simple thought of it soothed him. He wondered if they could be called boyfriends and planned to bring it up on their next outing. It had taken a little subterfuge to avoid his squad, telling them he was going to his parents and keeping away for the weekend. That had been harder than it sounded. He almost ran into Kirishima and Mina a few times while cooking their rooftop dinner, and he narrowly avoided being seen by Siro when he and Midoriya went out for a midday coffee. The only person he managed to avoid was Kaminari, probably because Kaminari had spent most of the weekend with Shinso. Shinso was not relaxed. It was his first day in Class 1A, and he was already facing a pop quiz. He had borrowed Midoriya's notes to prepare before transferring more precisely. He had had to decipher Midoriya's messy handwriting, but that only made the quiz easier, not easy. The pressure of being new in Class 1A stayed with him. There was also the problem of knowing about Bakugou and Midoriya being a hero duo. Shinso trusted himself to keep a secret, but he worried about Kaminari. He would need to find a way to keep Kaminari from talking, because if Kaminari let it slip, things could get messy. Kaminari could not focus. His weekend had been great. He had spent most of it with Shinso and kept insisting to himself that there was no crush. What he kept replaying, though, was the moment on Friday afternoon when he learned that Midoriya and Bakugou were going to be a hero duo. He had expected things to blow over. Bakugou had not threatened him or Shinso, and they had not mentioned it further. For a while everything seemed fine. Then Midoriya had cornered him and Shinso before dinner. If Kaminari thought Bakugou could be intimidating, Midoriya's intensity had been on another level. Midoriya's smile had felt sharp, and he had issued a startling, serious warning that left Kaminari unnerved. Even while he was with Shinso, Kaminari found himself distracted by the memory. He was relieved when Monday arrived. He hoped everything could return to normal. The rest of the week passed in the familiar rhythm of UA life. It was as normal as things could be, until Friday lunchtime when something unusual happened. Class 1A often walked to lunch together, and Minoma's weekly appearance had become part of that routine. A few barbed comments about 1A, Bakugou yelling, Kendo smacking Minoma and dragging him off. No one really gave it much thought anymore. Minoma had always kept some limits he liked to taunt, but not to get too personal. That Friday, however, he targeted Bakugou in a way that felt different. Minoma approached the table with a smug expression and told the group that he had something important to say. Apparently no one had ever told Bakugou what they had thought since the first day of school. Most of 1A rolled their eyes, Bakugou remained silent, and Midoriya's expression shifted into something unreadable. Minoma went on, insisting that everyone thought Bakugou was a villain. He accused Bakugou of yelling, cursing, and bullying classmates, of fighting too hard and caring nothing for harm he might cause. Minoma claimed it would be better if Bakugou just left. The lunchroom fell silent. Then, suddenly Midoriya moved. In a quick, anime-styled burst of motion, he stepped forward and landed a solid, decisive punch that knocked Minoma off balance. The classroom stared in shock. Uraraka looked like she might faint, Todoroki's expression broke its usual calm, and Kendo froze in mid-stride. Midoriya then spoke, with a fierce intensity that left the room trembling. He warned everyone not to call Bakugou a villain and made it clear he would not tolerate the suggestion. He argued that Bakugou's harshness was not cruelty but a method of preparation. By pushing his classmates to their limits, Bakugou showed he believed they could reach that level and could withstand intense conflict. Midoriya explained that real villains would not hold back, so training under pressure was necessary to survive true danger. He insisted that Bakugou pushed so everyone would be ready to be heroes when it mattered most, and anyone who could not see that should leave the school. Midoriya added that if 1B's superiority was true, Monoma still was not top. He suggested that the idea of class rankings worked both ways, but more importantly, he argued that Monoma's quirk depended on touch, which made him less formidable against classmates whose quirks did not require contact. Midoriya closed by ordering Monoma to stop messing with his class. The cafeteria remained hushed. Even Aizawa, who had arrived just in time to hear Monoma's opening remarks and was preparing to give him a detention, was watching Midoriya with a new, unsettled look that suggested he was rethinking his perceptions. Midoriya then turned, took Bakugou's hand, signaled for his classmates to follow, and left the cafeteria. Aizawa watched them go and then approached Monoma. Aizawa instructed Monoma to go to Recovery Girl's office because Midoriya had delivered a strong punch and Monoma needed to be checked. He also said Monoma would have detention that day and the following Monday. Monoma protested loudly about being punished for getting hit, but Aizawa replied that Monoma had crossed a line and would be spoken to, and that he intended to discuss Monoma's behavior with Vlad King and Principal Nizu. As Aizawa turned to check on his class, Monoma, still on the floor holding his cheek, remarked that he was surprised none of them had punched him sooner. Midoriya was furious. He dragged Bakugou through UA's halls up to the roof, with the rest of their class following behind in silence. Midoriya was too angry to speak, Bakugou seemed too hurt, the others were too shocked. Midoriya led them up the steps and out into the sunlit rooftop, guided Bakugou to sit on the concrete, sat beside him, and opened his bento. Kaminari broke the silence by wondering aloud if nobody was going to talk about what had just happened and pointing out that Midoriya had stood up to Monoma. Shiro nudged Kaminari, signaling him to be quiet, but Midoriya ignored the interruption and studied Bakugou's face to make sure he was all right. Bakugou was quiet and distant. Midoriya could tell Monoma had just given his worst fears life. Midoriya told Bakugou that no one here thought he was a villain and asked for confirmation. Bakugou muttered a subdued agreement. Kirishima frowned and insisted that Bakugou not simply answer with a single word they cared about him and none of them saw him as a villain. Shiro added that they would not spend time with him or tease him if they believed he was one. Mina said that Monoma had been mean. Ida adjusted his glasses to scold the language but agreed that Monoma's behavior was unacceptable. He explained that they all understood why Bakugou pushed them and that, despite his rough manner, it earned a certain respect even when Bakugou put his feet on UA's desks. A small smirk crossed Bakugou's face. Uraraka told Bakugou that he had pushed her to her absolute limit in their fight and that she had become a better fighter because of it. She had learned more about strategy in that fight than she had in class. One by one, each classmate reassured Bakugou that they did not see him as a villain. Todoroki added that he had experience with villainy and that Bakugou was nothing like his father, which lightened the mood. While the conversation continued, Aizawa slipped onto the rooftop and watched from the sidelines, quietly proud of his students. Satisfied that he was not needed, he slipped back into his classroom, prepared to let any late students off without warning that day. Tsu then asked when Bakugou and Midoriya had become so close, noting that they usually could not finish a conversation without yelling. Bakugou and Midoriya exchanged looks. Midoriya explained that they had reconciled a few weeks ago and were friends again. Uraraka reacted with surprise that they had made up without telling her. Kirishima clapped Bakugou on the shoulder and said he had known that sending Midoriya to study with him would help. Bakugou grumbled to get away and suggested they start eating before the bell. Off to the side, Jiru sat quietly. She knew about Midoriya and Bakugou's private relationship, and if they wanted to keep it that way, she would not be the one to reveal it. She smiled to herself and then turned to her partner for a hug. That day, every single student of Class 1A was late for class. It was the first time in UA history that Aizawa did not address the tardiness or expel anyone for it. Still, following protocol, Aizawa pulled Midoriya aside after class and warned him not to let a teacher catch him that way again. Midoriya thought being back at college had given him more motivation to write, and he hoped that would last when classes started the next day. Midoriya lay on his bed with Bakugou napping on his stomach, unable to shake Monoma's words that suggested Bakugou might be a villain. He ran his fingers through Bakugou's hair and smiled softly. Even if someone thought Bakugou could be a villain, Midoriya believed he wanted to be a hero and was too stubborn to give that up. Midoriya sighed and told Bakugou he should avoid letting a teacher see him next time. He considered confronting Monoma but knew Bakugou would never want him to take that risk. Instead, Midoriya had been gathering evidence. Between training, dates, studying, and quiet moments with Bakugou, he had recorded Monoma bullying classmates across several lunches. He had footage of Monoma goading Class 1C, insulting their skills, and belittling Class 1A. Still, Midoriya held back. He wanted something that would expose Monoma properly and end his harassment. Monoma's habit of mocking Class 1A eventually returned. After a brief absence, he deliberately targeted Midoriya in the cafeteria to draw attention. He sauntered through the room and taunted the class, claiming Midoriya was not the innocent person everyone believed and comparing him to Bakugou in a derogatory way. Aizawa had started following the class to lunch every day to keep Monoma in check, but even he seemed taken aback by the severity of Monoma's words. Monoma accused Midoriya of recent violence, of swearing, of relying on favoritism from All Might, and of hiding a temper behind a friendly smile. He painted Midoriya as a fraud and a stain on the school's reputation. Bakugou reacted with a sudden blast of power that rocked the cafeteria. In the aftermath, Monoma was thrown back by the force and lay on the floor, stunned. Bakugou was not on top of him. He was being held back only by Midoriya. The rest of Class 1A stepped back, tense and ready as if prepared to let Bakugou unleash his anger. Bakugou erupted in a heated defense of Midoriya, insisting that Midoriya deserved to be at the school more than anyone. He recounted how Midoriya's quirk had manifested just days before the entrance exam and how Midoriya had been prepared to pursue heroism even without a quirk. Bakugou emphasized Midoriya's dedication and compassion, saying Midoriya would have been a remarkable hero regardless of his quirk, and condemning Monoma's cruelty. As Bakugou calmed, Midoriya relinquished his effort to hold him and stepped forward. Midoriya declared that Monoma was finished. Monoma reacted in bewilderment. Midoriya explained that he had been collecting evidence of Monoma's bullying for a week, everything Monoma had said to classes 1A, 1B, and 1C, all recorded on his phone. He showed that the moment Monoma had pushed their class as far as he had, his chances at a hero career were over. Midoriya made it clear that he did not care about Monoma's insecurities. His own quirk sometimes injured him, but if it saved people, it was worth the cost, something Monoma could not understand. Midoriya walked out of the cafeteria and handed Aizawa his phone with the recordings accessible. Monoma looked between Midoriya and Bakugou as Class 1A watched Midoriya leave. From the way they had reacted, Monoma realized that Bakugou and Midoriya were far closer and more fiercely protective of each other than he had imagined, and that crossing one of them would be met with uncompromising resistance. Monoma was expelled. His school record was now permanently marked with a note about his bullying, and Class 1A was buzzing. Mina had taken some of Siro's tape to quiet Kirishima, only refraining from taping Kaminari's mouth shut because Shinso managed to distract him. Ida did his best to manage the rest of the class, even with questions racing through his own head. Jairu was the calmest one. She scrolled through her phone and listened to music while her girlfriend helped Ida keep the class under control. Nothing about Midoriya or Bakugou's behavior surprised her. They were dating, and from what she had heard through the walls, it had been a long time coming with a lot of history between them. She knew Bakugou and Midoriya had been childhood friends, but only once they started dating did she fully understand how close they had been and what had happened between them. They had always wanted to look out for each other. Bakugou could be terrible at expressing concern, and both of them had a lot of emotional baggage, but they were genuinely sweet together when they were alone. Jairu disliked feeling like she intruded, but her quirk made it hard not to overhear. She had heard about their dates, their plans, their studying and video game nights. It was honestly endearing how much they seemed to enjoy each other's company. It reminded her of her own relationship with Momo, different dynamics, same warmth. She wondered when they would come out to the rest of the class. After the encounters with Monoma, most of their classmates had to be realizing that their relationship went beyond friendship, though some of them were a bit dense. Todoroki looked as if he was forming a new theory, Jair hoped it would not be something too wild. Maybe this time he would land on the truth. She could not get Monoma's words out of her head. He had been right about All Might showing favoritism to Midoriya, but that was All Might's failing, not Midoriya's. Maybe All Might and Midoriya had a special bond close, even father and son like, yet it was All Might's responsibility to treat all his students equally and not to show favoritism. That burden did not belong to Midoriya. Like the rest of the class, Jair had a newfound respect for Midoriya. Learning that he had been considered quirkless for years and still strove to become a hero was revealing, but not surprising. Midoriya was probably one of the few people who could keep believing in the hero path even as the world and his peers doubted him. She would never make a point of mentioning it to him. It did not need saying. He had been quirkless for most of his life, and now he was here. He would be a hero, that was what mattered. So Jairu sat in her seat and read, confident that Bakugou and Midoriya would continue to be there for each other. Bakugou refused to let Midoriya go. They were in Bakugou's room, the one place in UA that Class 1A would think twice before barging into. He hated Monoma with a burning passion and was relieved that Aizawa and Nizu were taking disciplinary action. He and Midoriya had not left the room since the incident. Midoriya was unusually quiet, much like Bakugou had been after Monoma's verbal attack. Bakugou did not know how to start making him feel better. Monoma had pointed out the obvious favoritism from All Might, blamed Midoriya for manipulating people with his smile, and accused him of hiding things, claims that cut deep. Bakugou had no simple way to help Midoriya process it all. Bakugou called to Midoriya and asked if he wanted to hear a story. Midoriya looked at him, the hurt clear in his eyes, and then nodded. He leaned back into Bakugou as Bakugou ran his hand through his hair in a comforting gesture. Bakugou began to tell a story about a boy from a quiet village known for its prestigious school of magic. No matter how much the boy wished for magic, none of the spells or techniques ever worked for him. Elemental powers, physical spells, illusions, potions, nothing. Still, the boy never gave up. He prepared tirelessly to take the exam for the village's renowned school. Everyone mocked him and told him he would fail the exam. Even his best friend had once turned against him in an attempt to make him stop. But the boy refused to quit. The boy continued to train and prepare, holding on to his dream despite the ridicule and the setbacks. Midoriya kept taking notes on the different types of magic until he probably knew more about each kind than anyone else, even those who could use magic. Still, no one paid him any mind. Midoriya held his head high through it all. He ignored those who called him worthless and stupid, trusting that he was worth more than they knew. He kept his optimism and his smile, earning people's respect through his attitude and his willingness to help. One day, Midoriya ran into the most powerful magician in the world, a man known to be able to use every type of magic. Most people mastered multiple kinds, but not all of them. This magician could do it all and was admired by everyone. Midoriya asked his hero if he, too, could become a great magician and help people. The magician replied that he could not, and Midoriya was crushed. He almost quit, until his former best friend was in mortal danger. No one could figure out how to undo the spell binding him, or what potion would cure the poison a wicked witch had administered. Midoriya knew what to do. He grabbed the needed ingredients from the nearby potions master and measured just the right amounts to create a cure. Because he lacked magical ability, the potions master had to brew the potion and save the friend from the poison. The potions master received the credit, and Midoriya was berated. To free his friend from the binds, Midoriya led the spell master through an ancient, widely unknown unbinding spell. The spell master received full credit, and Midoriya was again blamed for being in the way. Midoriya left dejected, unaware that the master magician had been watching and listening. The master magician saw Midoriya's knowledge and his dejection and took him aside. The master magician revealed that his magic was failing. His body could no longer handle it after an elemental battle with a demon had left him badly weakened. He explained that his power came from a flower that gave life to the forests surrounding the village, and to the village itself the life magic that balanced and opposed the demon magic of the underworld. Because he could not keep the magic forever, the master magician passed that life magic, drawn from the flower, to Midoriya. Midoriya trained tirelessly until he could use his new magic at a basic level. He finally figured it out the morning of the exam for the prestigious magic school. Midoriya took the exam as he had always imagined and passed, barely. His magic was powerful but unstable. It seemed to act unpredictably almost every time he used it. A well-known teacher saw a spark in Midoriya, perhaps it was his attitude, his persistence, or something else, and allowed him to stay. Midoriya worked hard and gained more control over his magic with each passing day. His classmates enjoyed his company not because of his power but because of his attitude. They saw how much he wanted to help people and how his smile inspired them. They respected him and he made friends. The master magician favored Midoriya, and some blamed Midoriya for any perceived favoritism. Midoriya's classmates, including his former best friend, did not blame him. Only those truly jealous held him responsible. In time, Midoriya achieved what he had striven for. His best friend apologized and they reconciled and grew closer. He had an entire class full of friends and some from other classes as well, because Midoriya was so kind that people wanted to be near him. He became the greatest master magician the world had ever seen, even surpassing his mentor. Midoriya valued people for who they were inside, and he never forgot the worth of someone who could not use magic. Later, Bakugou looked down at Midoriya, whose eyes were watering. Bakugou placed a hand under Midoriya's chin and gently lifted his face so their eyes met. Bakugou asked if Midoriya understood. Midoriya nodded and smiled. Bakugou returned the smile and gave Midoriya a gentle, reassuring touch to the forehead before turning off the light and drawing them both under the covers to sleep. Midoriya felt warm as Bakugou slept beside him, and the sight made him smile. He turned to check the clock. It was 7. School started in 45 minutes, but Midoriya could not bring himself to want to go. He was emotionally exhausted from the previous events and physically tired from all the training he and Bakugou had been doing. He knew Bakugou was worn out too. Midoriya was not the only one Monoma had targeted. Carefully, he eased out of Bakugou's arms and left a pillow in his place, assuming Bakugou would sleep through his early alarms. Midoriya pulled out his phone, the device Mr. Aizawa had returned after Midoriya and Nizu had sent him the incriminating audio files. He created a chat with Mr. Aizawa and told him that he and Bakugou were not feeling well and would not be in class that day. Mr. Aizawa responded that he had suspected as much when they did not arrive early, and that they should take the day off and tomorrow if needed. He added that he would make sure they received the classwork and mentioned he was going to nap before class. Midoriya giggled at the message and looked at Bakugou with a small, tired smile. An idea came to him: a movie marathon. Bakugou and Midoriya shared a guilty pleasure for shark movies, from the cheesy ones to the big-budget fare. Midoriya knew the collection in his room contained the perfect distraction. A lineup of shark films would help them stop thinking about Monoma and feel a little closer to normal. All Midoriya needed to do was gather the discs, set up blankets and pillows in front of Bakugou's television, bring snacks, and make breakfast all without waking Bakugou. It was fairly easy to sneak in the movies, blankets, and snacks, but making breakfast proved harder. The dorm kitchen was nearly empty except for Kaminari hurrying in late, so Midoriya took on the cooking. He managed scrambled eggs, sausage, and pancakes from a simple mix and carried the tray back upstairs. By the time he returned, Bakugou was stirring awake. Midoriya set the food down beside the pile of pillows and sat next to him. He ran a hand through Bakugou's hair and softly called his name to wake him. Bakugou opened his eyes and asked what time it was. Midoriya told him it was movie marathon time and that Mr. Aizawa had given them today and possibly tomorrow off because of the stress caused by Monoma, and that they had been training hard lately. Bakugou accepted the explanation and asked how many All Might films Midoriya had brought, teasing that they could not watch them all. Midoriya countered by saying he had not brought All Might movies at all but a stack of shark films. Bakugou brightened at that and voiced his approval, asking which one they should start with. Midoriya suggested beginning with the classic Sharknado entries. Bakugou agreed enthusiastically and told Midoriya he would go make breakfast. Midoriya informed him that breakfast was already ready and insisted Bakugou sit down. They settled in, trading light teasing without intensity, and watched the first film. As the morning turned on, Bakugou playfully called Midoriya nerd, and Midoriya answered sleepily that they should keep the movies going. Bakugou remarked that Midoriya looked exhausted and that it might be time to rest. Midoriya shook his head but did not protest much. His eyelids kept dipping until he finally fell asleep. Not wanting him to stay on the floor, Bakugou gently lifted Midoriya, cradled him, and carried him to the bed. He laid him down carefully, climbed in beside him, and pulled the blankets over them both. With the room darkened for their movie day, Bakugou placed an extra pillow on the floor and said goodnight. Midoriya turned in his sleep and settled closer to Bakugou. Meanwhile, the Bakusquad and Deku held a meeting. Todoroki and Kirishima had been training together as usual, and both were worried for their friends, wondering what Midoriya and Bakugou had been doing on their days off. Kirishima opened the meeting by noting that Bakubro and Midobro had been acting really strange. Todoroki agreed and pointed out that Midoriya had claimed to get lost at the festival a few weeks earlier, which Todoroki found unlikely since Midoriya did not get lost. Kirishima added that Bakubro had not been as grumpy lately. Tsu asked if they thought the changes might be related, adding a small frog-like interjection in her usual way. Uraraka said she wanted answers and described how Midoriya had been acting oddly for weeks. She wondered, half joking, whether he was secretly studying espionage because she could not find him anywhere. Ida adjusted his glasses and told Uraraka that UA did not offer espionage classes and cautioned her against prying so intensely into Midoriya's affairs, reminding everyone that if Midoriya wanted them to know what he was doing, he would have said so. Jairu, passing the common room on her way to get a snack, suggested that maybe he would tell them and maybe he would not. Mina asked Jairu if she knew anything more, but Jairu dismissed it as none of her business. Kaminari then proposed an exaggerated possibility that Bakugou and Midoriya might have been kidnapped by aliens and replaced with clones, which drew stunned looks from the others. Siro rejected the idea flatly, joking that not even his brownies could make him believe that. Ida used the moment to remind Kaminari that he really should not be making brownies in the dorms or at all. Kaminari acknowledged the reprimand and said he would bake extra and leave them inside. Siro saluted Ida as he joked about heading to his dorm. Ida stammered that it was not what he meant, and Siro winked to show he understood. Mina called for attention and asked them to ignore the brief awkward moment between Ida and Siro. Ida insisted there was no awkwardness between him and Siro, while Kirishima laughed and teased that he had thought something was going on. Putting the teasing aside, Mina turned the conversation back to the main problem and agreed that, yes, there was tension to deal with. She worried aloud about what they would do, since Bakugou and Midoriya would be difficult to approach for an investigation. Kaminari announced that he had just received a text from Shinso and hurried out of the dorms. Uraraka panicked at the idea of investigating without him. Tsu suggested they might not investigate, saying it could be the others trying to make up for years they had not been friends. Todoroki asked what would happen if Kaminari was right and Midoriya and Bakugou had been replaced by clones. Kirishima put a reassuring hand on Todoroki's shoulder and said he did not think that was the case, but agreed that Tsu might be right and they should avoid getting involved for now. He did not want the two of them fighting again. Mina agreed to hold off for the time being. Uraraka insisted they needed to investigate, but Mina led her away, offering cupcakes Sato had just made and promising that they would look into things if circumstances did not return to something resembling normal soon or if they could find a way past everyone else. Kaminari said his goodbyes and left. Kirishima then asked Todoroki if he wanted to study together because he was struggling with a math problem. Todoroki accepted and followed Kirishima up to his room to study. Midoriya groaned as he woke. The room was dim, a sliver of light slipped between the curtains, and the movie setup from the night before was still in place. He must have fallen asleep before he could clean it up. He realized then that Bakugou was not in bed. Midoriya called for Bakugou but received no answer. He checked the clock and realized he was running late. He hurried to get his uniform on. He usually kept one in Bakugou's room in case Bakugou decided to stay the night, and in his rush he fumbled with the tie and somehow managed to put his jacket on backwards. Bakugou appeared in the doorway carrying 2 plates piled with pancakes, sausage, hash browns, and eggs and demanded what Midoriya was doing. Midoriya explained that he had thought Bakugou had gone to school without waking him and had feared he was really late. Bakugou said that Aizawa had given them the option of taking 2 days off and that he had chosen to use them because he did not feel like listening to their classmates that day. Midoriya protested that those classmates were Bakugou's friends and that he should be happy to hear them. Bakugou replied that he would be happy once Dunce's face stopped suggesting reckless ideas. Midoriya asked what that meant, and Bakugou relayed that one of their friends had suggested they try swimming in a frozen lake by breaking the ice. Midoriya guessed the friend might be testing some invention Hatsum had made, and Bakugou shot him an incredulous look. Midoriya then noticed the breakfast and asked if they could eat while watching the shark marathon. He expressed excitement about the idea and suggested they could talk strategy afterward. Bakugou agreed and urged him to come eat. Kirishima woke up flustered. Todoroki had come to his room to help him study the night before, and Kirishima had fallen asleep with his head on Todoroki's shoulder. When he opened his eyes, Todoroki had been awake and scrolling on his phone, having waited quietly rather than wake him. Todoroki said that Kirishima looked like he needed the rest and he did not want to disturb him. Kirishima apologized repeatedly for falling asleep, but Todoroki brushed it off and asked if Kirishima wanted to study again that evening. Kirishima found himself saying yes, still astonished at how calm Todoroki had been. He wondered why so many boys in his class were so easy to admire, and his thoughts kept circling back to Todoroki's kindness. Mina placed a hand on Kirishima's shoulder to startle him and asked what was wrong. He admitted he had read a spooky story that morning and felt jumpy. Mina teased him about being so easily unsettled, then mentioned that Kaminari and Shiro were busy later and that Bakugou was still missing in action. Mina invited Kirishima to the arcade, but he declined, explaining that he had promised Todoroki they would study that afternoon. Mina sounded surprised that Kirishima and Todoroki studied together. Kirishima explained that he had asked Todoroki to train with him one day when Bakugou was unavailable, and they had become good training and study partners. Mina suggested going to the arcade another day, and Kirishima agreed. Mina waved and said she would see him after school the next day, and Kirishima returned the wave, his thoughts already drifting back to the morning's events. Kirishima had come to genuinely enjoy studying with Todoroki. Todoroki never lost his temper when Kirishima needed help. He calmly explained what Kirishima was doing wrong and how to fix it. The sessions were peaceful. Lately, however, Kirishima had a harder time focusing. He kept thinking about waking up next to Todoroki that morning. Todoroki had been warm and comfortable, and had even been talking. Kirishima asked Todoroki to repeat what he had just said. Todoroki asked if Kirishima wanted to study again tomorrow. Kirishima explained that Mina wanted to go to the arcade after school but that he would be back by 6 and asked if that would work. Todoroki nodded in agreement. Kirishima said that sounded good and then asked how to do number 7 again. Todoroki chuckled and leaned in to point out where Kirishima had gone wrong. Todoroki found himself thinking that Kirishima was so close to comfort to him. He was not usually this comfortable being so near people. Even Midoriya was kept at a distance except for the occasional hug. Still, Todoroki realized he had been genuinely comfortable with Kirishima, which explained why he had let Kirishima sleep on him the night before. He glanced at Kirishima and noted that he looked cute when he focused. Kirishima might not be the smartest in class, Todoroki reflected, but he was one of the kindest and perhaps the cutest. He then reminded himself that Kirishima was probably straight and that his family would complicate anything more. At the training center, Midoriya flicked his finger at Bakugou and sent him flying across the room. Bakugou yelled that he did not think this was what the living sleeping bag had in mind when he said they could have a day or two off. Midoriya responded that he was not trying to skip training, he was just pointing out the inconsistency. Bakugou retorted that he doubted their roughhousing matched the intended break, and Midoriya replied that he had been hoping for another hour or two of practice. Midoriya then used his quirk to move quickly across the field and tackled Bakugou to the ground. Bakugou grinned and flipped them, pinning Midoriya's hand above his head. Bakugou challenged him, asking if Midoriya had really thought he could pin him. Midoriya admitted he had not. He had intended to push Bakugou off with his legs to see how far he would fly. Midoriya used his quirk in his legs to send Bakugou flying, and Bakugou thought as he landed that Midoriya was getting far too skilled at this. Their training continued for a couple of hours, with neither obtaining a decisive victory. Bakugou and Midoriya traded blows and counters, evenly matched and relentless. Aizawa watched from the viewing platform along the wall, sighing but not surprised to see the two of them here. They could never rest for too long, and watching them provided a break from Yamada's unusually loud behavior that day. Aizawa scanned the training field and noted how effective Midoriya and Bakugou were together, almost as if they had been training like this for years, which his knowledge of their middle school years told him was not the case. He wondered how exceptional they might be if they had been practicing together that long. He also considered that Midoriya had not had his quirk in middle school and had only recently begun to master it, registering it just before the start of the school year. Aizawa had looked into Midoriya's background and concluded the boy was tougher than he appeared, but he still questioned why the quirk had manifested so late and why it bore such resemblance to All Might's. For now, Aizawa told himself, as long as Midoriya did not keep risking serious injury, he would manage the situation. He also made a mental note to press All Might for answers later. Kaminari chased a little gray kitten he had gotten for Shinso for Valentine's Day, trying to catch it so he could tie a tiny bow to its collar. He finally scooped the kitten up and fastened the bow, then scratched behind its ears as it purred. He had laid out a box of chocolates and a blanket and placed the kitten in a ventilated box, telling the kitten that Shinso would be there any minute. A knock sounded at the door. Kaminari opened it to find Shinso standing there with a teddy bear and some chocolates, a faint blush on his face that Kaminari found endearing. Shinso stepped inside and handed the gifts to Kaminari, explaining that they were for him. Kaminari thanked him and set them on the bed. He then offered Shinso the box and encouraged him to open it. Shinso smiled at Kaminari's excitement and lifted the lid. The kitten popped up and nudged his face, making him smile as he cradled it. Kaminari winked at him, and they shared a small, shy moment before stepping back. Todoroki felt nervous. Kirishima was his first boyfriend and this was his first Valentine's Day in a relationship. He had put together a gift basket with chocolates, a shark plushie, a rose, and a leather cord bracelet, one he had seen Kirishima admiring in a shop and worried whether it was enough. A knock at the door announced Kirishima's arrival. Kirishima greeted Todoroki with an affectionate nickname and walked in carrying a basket. Todoroki stammered a greeting as Kirishima explained that he had brought a present and suggested they watch a movie and cuddle. Todoroki's nerves eased at the thought, and he told Kirishima that he had a gift too. Kirishima hugged the shark plushie with obvious delight and urged Todoroki to open his basket. Todoroki unpacked chocolate, a penguin stuffed animal, and a ceramic novelty that read, in Devhor, and was labeled as meant to be smashed and destroyed. He laughed at where Kirishima had found it and felt his fondness grow. Kirishima grinned, suggested a movie day, and the two of them set about building a cozy pillow fort together. Todoroki thanked him, and they settled in for their Valentine's movie time. Momo was excited to surprise Jairu with a Valentine's date. She knew Jairu was uneasy about the holiday because their parents did not accept them, and she hoped the surprise would brighten the evening. She finished stringing lights and arranging food and a blanket, expecting Jairu to arrive any minute. When Jairu appeared, they looked captivated by the lights. Momo welcomed them and asked if they were ready for the surprise. Jairu admitted that it was beautiful, and Momo led them to the blanket. Jairu presented a red basket tied with a gold ribbon that reminded Momo of her hero costume. Inside were chocolates, a selection of teas Momo had wanted to try, and a small black book filled with scrapbooked photos of the two of them, hearts, notes about their days together, and pages of song lyrics Jairu had written. Momo was deeply moved and pulled Jairu into an appreciative embrace. They shared a quiet, affectionate moment. After they ate, Momo pointed out constellations and listened as Jairu mentioned songs and bands inspired by the stories behind the stars. When Jairu drifted off to sleep against her, Momo gently adjusted their blanket and settled in beside them, watching the lights. She quietly wished them a happy Valentine's Day. Everyone was happy to see Bakugou and Midoriya back in class. Ida did not even comment about Bakugou's feet being up on the desk. The Bakusquad immediately surrounded Bakugou as they came in, firing questions a mile a minute about what Bakugou and Midoriya had done and how Bakugou was feeling after Monoma's nonsense. After only a couple of minutes, Bakugou exploded at them, ordering them to stop asking stupid questions and insisting it was too early for this. Midoriya chuckled before Uraraka tackled him. Uraraka asked how he was feeling and insisted that Monoma had been out of line. Midoriya reassured Uraraka that he was fine and said he was just happy to be back. Uraraka teased that Mr. Grumpy had been talking about his boyfriend all weekend. Bakugou snapped around and demanded what she had said. Midoriya cut in and said Bakugou had indeed talked about his boyfriend the whole time, that the two of them seemed to get along great. Bakugou cursed at Midoriya, and someone in the class pointed out that Bakugou apparently had a boyfriend, which set the Bakusquad and Deku into laughter. Kirishima laughed and told Bakugou he had been called out. Midoriya gave Bakugou a sly grin and then turned back to Uraraka to distract her from what he had said. Bakugou shook his head in irritation. Kirishima, meanwhile, found himself unable to focus. His study sessions with Todoroki had been going extremely well, but he insisted to himself that nothing would come of it. Todoroki was just a friend. A really cute, really smart friend. Mina pulled Kirishima out of his thoughts as they left class. Mina asked if he was ready, smiling widely, and Kirishima remembered that he had promised to go to the arcade with her. He asked for a moment to pack up. Todoroki called from behind and asked if Kirishima wanted to study together again that night. Kirishima answered that he would, mentioning he would be at the arcade with Mina for a bit and suggesting they study after dinner. Todoroki agreed to meet at dinner, and they exchanged casual goodbyes. Mina blinked in surprise that Kirishima called Todoroki to Dubro, and Kirishima explained that he had given Todoroki a nickname. Mina asked if Todoroki minded, and Kirishima said he did not. They changed in the dorms and then headed to the arcade. Kirishima smiled every time he saw the clown game he and Todoroki had played before, but he focused on having fun with Mina. They played skee-ball fiercely. Mina was determined to beat Kirishima, who held the high score in their friend group. Mina declared she would beat him this time, while Kirishima boasted that only one person had ever beaten him at the game. Mina was surprised that anyone had beaten him, and Kirishima explained that he had once taken Todoroki to the arcade as a study break and discovered that Todoroki was unexpectedly good at skee-ball, especially for someone who had not played before. Mina stared in surprise that Kirishima had brought Todoroki to an arcade, and Kirishima reminded her they had gone for a study break. Mina admitted she had not expected Todoroki to go to an arcade. He seemed so serious. Kirishima suggested that Todoroki might just need someone to go with and urged Mina to finish the game so they could play again. Mina agreed. As they put their tickets into the counting machine, Mina asked Kirishima if he liked anyone. Kirishima froze for a moment, images of Todoroki flashing through his head, and then stammered that he had not met anyone he liked yet. Mina sensed his hesitation but accepted his answer and smiled, content to let the subject drop. Kirishima sighed with relief. When they returned to the dorms, Kirishima slipped past Shiro and Kaminari chatting in the living room and hurried upstairs to see Todoroki before dinner, hoping for a little extra studying. Mina watched him go with a frown. She had not expected him to leave her right after they got back. Kaminari called after Mina, asking where they had been because the others were bored, and Shiro teased Mina about spending time with Kirishima. Mina explained she had just wanted to hang out with Kirishima, and when Shiro pressed, she said there was nothing going on between them yet. Kirishima knocked on Todoroki's door, still thinking about how critical Mina had been of Todoroki and feeling more irritated than he expected. Todoroki called Kirishima in, and Kirishima asked if they could start early. Todoroki opened the door wider and confirmed that Kirishima had his books. Kirishima held up the backpack he had grabbed on the way over and stepped into Todoroki's room, appreciating the calm, peaceful atmosphere with its muted colors and a couple of potted plants. Kirishima sat at the extra chair they had found in a storage closet, ready to begin studying. Kirishima asked if they were doing math. He could have sworn he saw an amused grin flash across Todoroki's face. Todoroki agreed. They had barely made it 20 minutes before Kirishima steered the conversation off course. Kirishima recalled that Aizawa once took Kaminari's test back to keep after showing him his grade. Todoroki asked if that was true. Kirishima explained that Kaminari had gotten distracted during a test and doodled a picture of Aizawa in the margin, and that Present Mike had said Aizawa hung it on his fridge. A small laugh escaped Todoroki, and Kirishima's eyes widened at the sound. He had never seen Todoroki laugh before, and he looked genuinely happy. Todoroki cleared his throat and fell back into his usual deadpan, then joked that Aizawa had adopted their class. Kirishima stared, smiled, and laughed, agreeing that Aizawa had adopted all of them. A knock came at Todoroki's door, and Midoriya called that dinner was ready. Todoroki said he would be down in a minute. Kirishima, a little disappointed, said they should go to dinner. They walked to the door, and Todoroki held it open for Kirishima. As they passed, Todoroki asked if they could play a game of Phase 10 after dinner before returning to studying. Kirishima's heart leapt at the nickname and the invitation. He agreed enthusiastically. Todoroki offered a small smile before heading down to dinner. Kirishima felt himself blush and decided Todoroki should smile more, because it suited him. Midoriya raced across the training yard. The course was almost finished. He only needed a few more minutes. He had recruited Cementos to help, and although Cementos was surprised by both the idea and the fact that Midoriya and Bakugou were dating, he agreed. After all, it was a cute plan and seemed like a perfect way for Bakugou to blow off steam without causing any explosions. Midoriya thanked Cementos as he left, and Cementos promised to return later that night to help tear everything down. Midoriya waited, thinking Bakugou should be arriving any minute. When Bakugou appeared, he demanded to know what they were doing out on the training field. Midoriya dragged him into the area, where cement walls had been painted red, pink, orange, and green. Bakugou rolled his eyes and complained that those colors should never be used together, calling the combination horrendous. Midoriya playfully hit his arm at the comment. Midoriya explained that the setup was a Valentine's Day surprise, an obstacle course, built with Cementos's help, with Bakugou's gifts hidden inside. He described it as a corn maze-style obstacle course, except with cement instead of corn and obstacle labyrinth. Bakugou stared for a moment and then admitted that Midoriya had gone all out. Midoriya confirmed with a grin, and Bakugou agreed they should start. They worked their way through the labyrinth. It took about an hour and a half, mostly because Midoriya, who already knew the layout, let Bakugou choose each turn. By the end they were sweaty, panting, tired, and happy. Bakugou had found all of his gifts and carried a basket for them, and Midoriya had enjoyed spending time with his boyfriend. Bakugou urged Midoriya to return to the dorms, saying his present was waiting on the roof. Midoriya smiled and reminded him not to forget to come back at 7 because he had promised Cementos he would help clean up. Bakugou teased that he would come, adding that 3 was better than 2. Midoriya thanked him, and Bakugou smiled and wished him a happy Valentine's Day. When Todoroki and Kirishima arrived at dinner, they found all of the seats filled except for the 2 between Bakugou and Midoriya. They exchanged a quick glance to avoid making it obvious, then sat down, Kirishima beside Bakugou and Todoroki beside Midoriya. Bakugou's frown deepened when he noticed how stiff Kirishima was. Kirishima was rarely nervous, especially not around Bakugou. Bakugou glared and demanded what was wrong with Kirishima. Kirishima, awkward and trying to cover, said he was just a bit nervous about math and began a clumsy explanation about watching YouTube videos to study. Bakugou narrowed his eyes, unconvinced, and offered to tutor him more. Kirishima waved it off, insisting he did not want to bother anyone. Mina called across the table, noting Kirishima's nervousness. Kirishima blamed a sugar rush from brownies and insisted he was fine. He sighed in relief when no one pressed the issue. Todoroki was acutely aware of the presence of the warm, steady person next to him. He noticed Kirishima's spiky hair and the easy smile that rivaled Midoriya's. Midoriya asked if Todoroki was all right, observing that he seemed stiffer than usual. Todoroki replied that he had been thinking about his father that afternoon. Midoriya shared an idea about how combining heat in a certain way might cause overheating, explaining that overheating could lead to dizziness and fatigue and might take a day or 2 to recover from. Someone asked whether overheating could be fatal. Midoriya admitted he could not find specifics and they all acknowledged uncertainty about the risks. They discussed how such a tactic might be implemented in a subtle way, with Midoriya saying he had some ideas that would be easier to demonstrate than to explain. Ida cut in with a firm admonition, insisting that they stop discussing harming a pro-hero and that no one would attempt to hurt Endeavor. The conversation shifted awkwardly, but Todoroki and Midoriya shared a knowing look and a brief, conspiratorial smile. After dinner, Todoroki slipped away first, saying he needed to research heat exhaustion. Kirishima left soon after, planning to watch math videos. It was not difficult for them to meet again in Todoroki's dorm. Todoroki made sure they would focus on studying and asked if they were ready to do math without distractions. Kirishima froze for a moment and then said he was ready, trying to recall where they had left off. Todoroki pulled a pencil from his bag and announced their topic: statistics and confidence intervals. Kirishima blinked in surprise, unsure they had covered that before. Todoroki reminded him they had mentioned it the day before and explained how confidence intervals related to estimating error. Kirishima agreed to start. They worked steadily. Kirishima leaned back and yawned, asking how long they had been studying. Todoroki checked the time and noted that their session and the rest of their homework had taken several hours. Kirishima's jaw dropped at the length of the study session, and Todoroki apologized that they could have stopped sooner. Kirishima waved it off, grateful and saying the session had been helpful and enjoyable. Todoroki agreed that he also found the sessions useful and more pleasant than he had expected. By then both were tired. Todoroki suggested it might be time to sleep, and Kirishima, already drowsy, agreed. Todoroki offered that there was enough space on his bed for both of them and that it might be easier than walking back to Kirishima's dorm. After a short pause and another yawn, Kirishima accepted. Todoroki pulled out pajamas and prepared for bed. They settled into the bed, Todoroki covering both of them with the blankets. Kirishima fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the long evening of study. Todoroki watched him sleep for a moment, then quietly wished him a good night. Todoroki woke to an unusual warmth and realized he was being held. Kirishima was asleep with an arm around him, clutching a shark plush for comfort. Todoroki sat up carefully, flustered and trying not to stare. Kirishima blinked awake and greeted him with a sleepy, concerned look before apologizing and explaining that he usually slept with the giant shark plush. He laughed a little when Todoroki teased him about his teeth-looking grin and insisted they get ready for school. Todoroki suggested it was time to change, and Kirishima said he would go back to his room and thanked Todoroki for the study session and for letting him stay the night, using the affectionate nickname Todubro as he grabbed his bag and ran out the door. Todoroki watched him go with a small smile, feeling unexpectedly warm and a little embarrassed at how friendly Kirishima had been. Midoriya woke in Bakugou's arms and took a moment to admire how peaceful Bakugou looked while sleeping. Bakugou sometimes mumbled grumpy things in his sleep, but occasionally he would murmur something tender like an "I love you" or call Midoriya's name before pulling him closer, and those small, private moments always felt precious to Midoriya. He promised himself he would never mention it aloud. Downstairs, Hagakure, Mina, Shiro, and Uraraka were laughing together. Midoriya had only meant to grab a quick breakfast to take back upstairs for Bakugou, but the conversation drew him in. Mina excitedly told Uraraka that she definitely had a crush on someone and urged her to ask him out. Uraraka confessed that she did have feelings, but she had hesitated because Deku had been disappearing a lot lately and she thought he might be too busy with training to respond. Shiro wondered aloud whether Midoriya even liked girls, saying he had assumed Midoriya might prefer men. Mina and the others debated possibilities. Hagakure suggested Bakugou would look cute with Kirishima, Mina teased that Kirishima might be cute with her, and others joked about unlikely pairings. Midoriya listened as Shiro muttered that someone blunt might suit Ida, a comment Midoriya overheard as the group continued to tease and speculate. Smiling, Midoriya took the breakfast for himself and Bakugou and slipped past the group, heading back upstairs. As he left, he heard a last muffled complaint about Monoma from the circle below, which made him grin as he climbed the stairs. Bakugou was not happy. He had gone to bed warm and comfortable, but when he woke he found the other side of the bed cold. His boyfriend Midoriya had left and it was still early. Before he could reach for his phone, the door opened and the scent of eggs and bacon filled the room. Midoriya shut the door behind him, set the tray of food on the bed, and told Bakugou he had made breakfast. Bakugou smiled and thanked him, calling him a nerd as usual. Midoriya then mentioned that he had overheard something that morning and, with a nervous look, explained that some classmates had been gossiping about which students would look good together. Bakugou raised an eyebrow and asked if Midoriya had been eavesdropping. Midoriya admitted it had been hard not to overhear because they had been loud. He relayed the assortment of pairings. Uraraka apparently liked him, Hagakure thought Bakugou would look good with Kirishima, Mina liked Kirishima, and others had joked that Bakugou would never date Todoroki. Then Midoriya added, with a grimace, that their classmates had suggested the only boy who would date Bakugou was Monoma, since he was the only one wild enough. Hearing that last part set Bakugou off. He exploded with furious disbelief at the idea of being paired with Monoma, reminding Midoriya that they had recently had Monoma expelled for attacking both of them. Midoriya laughed at Bakugou's expression, admitting he had been annoyed by the gossip but had chosen not to correct it because they planned to announce their relationship on their own terms. Bakugou swore he would make them regret it, and when Midoriya reminded him about sparring and training that day, Bakugou's grin went wicked as he agreed they would spar. That afternoon, Mina and Uraraka found themselves paired against Bakugou and Kirishima for sparring. Both girls were winded. Uraraka joked weakly about passing out from exertion, and Mina asked why Bakugou was pushing himself so hard. Kirishima said he didn't know, but neither girl thought they could take much more. Their complaint was cut short when Bakugou's explosions sent them sprawling backward. Mina felt her hands yanked behind her as cork-canceling cuffs snapped around her wrists. Uraraka received the same treatment. Kirishima, apologizing quietly to Mina, explained he didn't know why Bakugou was so aggressive. The two girls were led out of the sparring ring by Kirishima and Bakugou amid a few concerned looks from classmates. Midoriya appeared to be debating whether to step in but ultimately stayed back. Aizawa looked concerned as well but simply motioned for the next groups to begin. After the first round, each losing pair was seated with their cuffs still on, which only increased curiosity. Aizawa then explained that today they were trying a new exercise, a hostage escape drill. Mina, who was assigned as a hostage this time, bristled at the terminology but accepted it. She preferred being a hostage now if it meant someone like Bakugou would be in that position next week. As the hostages were taken to their spot, none of them liked the intensity of Bakugou's glare. Bakugou maintained a hard, dangerous smile throughout the exercise that made Kirishima uneasy. It was not a warm smile, it was a tense, angry smile that suggested Bakugou was ready to go all out. He glared at Mina and Uraraka relentlessly, and even directed an unusual stare at Hagakure, which surprised Kirishima since Bakugou rarely spoke to her. Mina tried to pick at her cuffs with a makeshift bobby pin until Bakugou intercepted her, his gaze never leaving the pair. Kirishima did his best to distract Bakugou, and when the timer finally went off he relieved the tension by physically pulling Bakugou away. Bakugou gave little resistance, seemingly satisfied with the outcome. After dinner that evening, Shiro, Kirishima, Kaminari, and Mina all noticed how often Bakugou glared at Mina in class, while studying together, and even during their meal. Mina felt hurt and confused. It was more intense than Bakugou's usual temper. Later, Bakugou pulled Mina, Uraraka, and Hagakure into a quieter room away from the others. He stared at each of them for a long moment and then spoke angrily, making clear that he was furious about the gossip. He insisted that if they were going to have a shipping party, they should not include him in any jokes pairing him with Monoma, since Monoma had attacked him and Midoriya and been punished for it. He told Mina bluntly that she had no place in the Bakusquad if she treated that lightly, and told Uraraka she had no place in Midoriya's circle if she repeated those jokes. He also stated plainly that he was dating Amanda and that they should stop making light of his personal life. All three of them froze at his outburst. Mina, stunned, asked if someone had actually heard the gossip. Hagakure responded that she had heard about it and was upset. Mina muttered that she was annoyed with Shiro, thinking he had spread it, but Shiro denied mentioning it. Another classmate commented that Shiro was probably smarter than that in these situations. Mina, quiet and remorseful, apologized directly to Bakugou. He held her gaze, expression unreadable, and simply stared. Bakugou warned them not to do it again and turned away. The three of them stood there, wondering who had overheard them and decided to tell Bakugou, and regretting ever imagining Bakugou paired with anyone. The first thing Midoriya heard when he walked downstairs was Hagakure, Mina, Shiro, and Uraraka laughing. He had only wanted a quick breakfast to take back upstairs to his boyfriend, But his morning was unexpectedly filled with people pairing classmates together. Mina insisted that Uraraka clearly had a crush. Uraraka admitted that she did, but explained that she wanted to wait because Deku had been disappearing a lot lately and seemed stressed with training. Midoriya nearly choked on his. But Shiro remarked that he had thought Midoriya might be gay, and Midoriya thought to himself that he identified as pan. Uraraka mentioned that Deku had asked her about the strange feelings he was having and that he had confirmed it was a crush after she brought it up. Hagakure suggested that maybe he had been trying to confess but was too nervous, while Shiro speculated that Deku might be so focused on training that he had only just realized what romantic feelings were. Mina glared at Shiro and asked if he was trying to make Uraraka sad. Shiro defended himself by saying he doubted Deku would directly ask the person he had weird feelings around what those feelings were. The others teased Shiro about being blunt and single. As Shiro left the conversation, he mumbled that Ida would probably appreciate bluntness, and Midoriya heard it. The conversation shifted to bets on Bakugou. Mina declared she was sure he was not interested in girls, and Hagakure joked that he would look cute with Kirishima. Mina countered that Kirishima would look cute with her. Uraraka offered Monoma as a possibility, which made the group laugh. Midoriya stepped out of the kitchen and walked past them, causing Hagakure, Mina, and Uraraka to stare in surprise. As he turned down the hallway, Midoriya declared that Monoma could never win over his boyfriend. Bakugou woke up in a decent mood but found that his boyfriend had gone missing. After waiting for him to return with breakfast, Bakugou went to check. He barely made it down the stairs before Midoriya came toward him in a near panic. Midoriya grabbed Bakugou's arm, spun him around, handed him one of the 2 plates he was carrying, and pulled him back upstairs. Bakugou demanded what Midoriya was doing, and Midoriya admitted that he had messed up. When Bakugou pressed for details, Midoriya explained that Mina, Hagakure, and Uraraka had been shipping people and that he had accidentally overheard them. Midoriya told Bakugou that the girls had paired Bakugou with Kirishima, which Mina had immediately refused because she liked Kirishima, and then had suggested Bakugou and Monoma together. Bakugou whirled around, furious and ready to storm back down the stairs, but Midoriya gripped his arm to stop him and confessed the thing he had said in the heat of the moment. He had joked that Monoma could never win over his boyfriend. Bakugou stared at him for a beat and then broke into laughter, clutching the plate so he would not drop it. Midoriya laughed with him and, with a grin, suggested they go back to Bakugou's room to avoid being surrounded by the nosy girls for the next hour. Bakugou agreed. Okay, and the story returned to the main plot. Bakugou had used his explosion quirk on Mina and Uraraka during training after Midoriya mentioned the shipping rumors, and he had yelled at them afterward. Mina thought of Amanda and felt confused. They already knew Amanda was a man, but that still did not explain who he was. Bakugou had not been forthcoming with information, so Mina was left to figure it out herself. She hoped it was not Kirishima. She wondered about Kirishima's orientation, thinking of how Hagakure and others shipped him with Bakugou, and decided it might be time to find out. Kirishima was smiling as he and Todoroki headed to the arcade for a break from studying. He considered asking Todoroki to see the new hero movie that weekend, worrying it might seem too date-like, and realized that his own thoughts suggested he cared about more than friendship. Kirishima stepped out of his room intending to knock on Todoroki's door, and then spotted Mina walking toward him. Mina asked him point-blank if he was gay. Kirishima was surprised and pulled her into his room to ask why she wanted to know. Mina explained that some girls were shipping him with Bakugou. Kirishima laughed and insisted he did not have romantic feelings for Bakugou, teasing that Bakugou might blow him up. Mina pressed further, and Kirishima admitted that he was bisexual and that he liked a guy. Mina asked if the person was someone from their class, and Kirishima, wanting to escape the conversation, said maybe and excused himself, promising they could hang out later. He ran down the hallway with Mina watching him leave. Kirishima slowed before Todoroki's door, mustering courage, and then knocked. He asked Todoroki if he wanted to go to the movies later as a way to do something fun after studying. Todoroki responded that it sounded enjoyable and asked what time. Kirishima suggested around 5 and accepted Todoroki's invitation to come in and check the movie listings together. They sat at Todoroki's computer and looked through the cinema website. Kirishima suggested the new All Might movie, but Todoroki remarked that Midoriya would be upset if they watched it before him. They agreed to skip romantic comedies. Todoroki mentioned a new horror movie and gave Kirishima a sideways glance, thinking about how Kirishima might react. Kirishima agreed enthusiastically. They stayed and talked about their class, Bakugou's strange behavior during training, Mina's earlier confusion, and the yelling they had heard. The moment felt right for both of them. Later, at the theater, Todoroki experienced a flare-up on his left side caused by his fire ability while he was in the bathroom out of Kirishima's sight. He used his ice to cover that side and extinguish the flames, careful to avoid leaving himself drenched. He reminded himself he could manage the situation and just needed to sit through the horror movie with Kirishima possibly leaning on him for support. Once inside, Todoroki struggled to stay calm as Kirishima reacted to every jump scare by gripping his arm tightly. Todoroki tried not to ignite again, and Kirishima's nervous clinging only made it harder and also cuter in Todoroki's mind. Midoriya and Bakugou happened to be in the same movie. Midoriya tried not to laugh at the sight of Todoroki's conflicted expression, and Bakugou snickered as well. Bakugou had taken a few candid photos, but both he and Midoriya were more focused on trying not to break into laughter. Midoriya quietly sent Todoroki a text, suggesting he put his arm around Kirishima to calm him and warning that bursting into flames would get them kicked out. Todoroki felt his phone vibrate and used his free arm to glance at the message, startled to realize Midoriya was there. He considered the suggestion. Putting an arm around Kirishima could help steady things without causing a scene. He thought about how appreciative Kirishima would be and the lighthearted promise he had made to himself about treating Midoriya to the All Might movie if the plan worked. Kirishima noticed when Todoroki gently freed his arm from his nervous hold and wondered with a frown whether Todoroki disliked being held. He felt a bit unsure but hopeful about how the evening was going. Kirishima began to shift away from Todoroki, not wanting to crowd him, when Todoroki slipped an arm around him and drew him back. Kirishima blushed and then relaxed into the hold. He glanced up and noticed Todoroki was flushed too, which made his heart race. For a moment Kirishima let himself hope that Todoroki might like him back, then he scolded himself and tried to focus on the movie. Bakugou and Midoriya were still trying not to snicker as the film ended. Todoroki looked calmer, but both he and Kirishima seemed to be experiencing a kind of awkward panic. Bakugou turned to Midoriya and wondered if this was the situation with the guy someone had been crushing on. Midoriya thought it was possible but suspected it hadn't been a formal date. He felt Todoroki would have mentioned asking Kirishima out if that had happened. Bakugou grinned and said it might be time to push them along. He then pulled out his phone and sent teasing messages through their contacts, nudging Kirishima to ask Todoroki out. Kirishima stared at his phone in shock, flushed at how obvious his feelings must have been. He didn't think his crush showed so plainly. He glanced at Todoroki, who was frowning at his own phone, and wondered all over again if Todoroki might like him too. Todoroki looked up at Kirishima and smiled, which made Kirishima's heart flip. He wondered if risking a confession was worth potentially changing their friendship. His certainty wavered. Todoroki scrolled through his messages in mild frustration and found texts from Midoriya asking why he had been at the theater and why Midoriya had missed him there. Midoriya's messages also teased Todoroki about being with Kirishima and made it clear he did not care about labels. He just wanted Todoroki to be happy. Todoroki blinked in surprise and briefly denied being anything specific, then read Midoriya's reply that he had seemed very flushed while cuddling Kirishima and appeared happy together. Todoroki felt a flicker of uncertainty. He told himself that Kirishima was bright and outgoing while he was different, and he struggled to believe someone as amazing as Kirishima could like him. Bakugou loved his boyfriend. Sometimes he questioned whether he loved him too much, and this was one of those times. Midoriya was determined to learn how to combine their quirks, Midoriya's finger flick and Bakugou's explosions, to create a controlled wave of explosive force. It was difficult. The angle, movement, and timing had to be perfect, and nothing was ever easy. Midoriya explained the plan to Bakugou. He would stand directly in front of Bakugou with Bakugou's arms around him so that both of their hands formed a tunnel, similar to Bakugou's AP shot but made with two hands. As Bakugou formed the explosion, Midoriya would flick, directing the blast outward like the second hand in Bakugou's AP shot. Once they could make it work, they would work on sweeping the motion to cover more ground. Bakugou agreed with a sharp, amused tone and called Midoriya a nerd, and the two of them moved into position. Bakugou centered himself and focused, and together they unleashed the combined technique. The result was a powerful blast that covered a large portion of Gym Gamma, less concentrated than Bakugou's standard AP shot but still impressive. Aizawa, watching from the stands, visibly registered surprise and looked relieved that he had chosen to observe rather than intervene. Midoriya and Bakugou celebrated. Their specialty move had finally succeeded. All they had left was perfecting the sweep that would make it more versatile. They spent another 2 hours refining the motion, having received conditional permission from Aizawa to stay late. They were energized, their fighting style was coming together. With the duo exams only weeks away, they pressed Aizawa for even more practice time, a request that was neither fully approved nor denied. Kirishima felt exhausted. He had not been sleeping well since his and Todoroki's awkward but promising outing that they had both agreed was not a date. He wanted to curl up next to Todoroki and sleep, but going directly to his room felt like it might be strange. Instead, Kirishima made himself a cup of chamomile tea and returned to his dorm, where Todoroki was already waiting. Kirishima called Todoroki's name with a yawn and asked what he was doing there. Todoroki replied that he had come to see if Kirishima wanted to study and, noticing how tired Kirishima looked, asked if everything was all right. Kirishima admitted he had not been able to sleep. When Todoroki offered to leave so Kirishima could rest, Kirishima quickly said he did not want him to go, and he realized he had meant it. Kirishima unlocked his door and held it open for Todoroki. After closing the door, he sat on his bed and stared off for a moment. Todoroki observed that Kirishima looked worn out, and he gently took the teacup, setting it on the nightstand before guiding Kirishima to lie down and pulling a blanket up over him. As Todoroki rose to leave, Kirishima gave his hand a small tug. Todoroki paused, then made an impulsive, kind decision. He lay down beside Kirishima and drew him close so that Kirishima's head rested on Todoroki's chest. Todoroki smoothed his fingers through Kirishima's hair and soon they both drifted into a peaceful sleep. There was a different energy in the classroom that morning. Midoriya could feel it humming through the air. Everyone was smiling as if the future were bright. A couple of students had rainbow face paint. Momo was putting the finishing touches on a rainbow eyeshadow look for Jairu while smiling at her partner, who had pride paint already on their cheek. Midoriya noticed pride keychains on backpacks and flags tucked into bags. He had a pan pride flag in his own bag. He glanced at Kaken and saw, for the first time in a long while, not a scowl but a small smile. Even though their class had been made to take summer classes after many attacks, June 1st had brought a lightness to everyone. The bell rang. Momo packed away her makeup supplies and smiled at her date before turning to face the front of the room. Midoriya fidgeted, a mix of wanting to be present and wanting the day to hurry so he could spend time with his classmates. His gaze snapped to the door when Aizawa walked in. Aizawa had the male pride colors and a progressive rainbow painted on his cheeks, and his usual gray scarf was replaced by a rainbow one. He wore a small, almost shy smile, and Midoriya could not help but grin back. Aizawa reminded the class that homophobia or transphobia would not be tolerated and that anyone who wanted to share something with the class could do so now. Kirishima stood and announced that he was bisexual and transgender. The room erupted in celebration. Mina cheered loudly, and Kaminari and Siro clapped enthusiastically. Bakugou remarked that Kirishima sounded very manly, earning grins from the Bakusquad. Kaminari stood next and said that he was queer and gender fluid. He raised his wrist to show bracelets and explained that blue indicated he/him, pink she/her, and purple xe/them, whichever bracelets he wore at the time signified the pronouns he was using. The cheering grew louder. Bakugou watched with an approving look and Mina hugged Kaminari tightly with obvious excitement. Shinso then stood and quietly said that he was queer and that he was dating Kaminari. Midoriya reacted with delighted surprise, unable to hide how pleased he was that Shinso had shared it openly. Kaminari and Shinso blushed at the attention. Bakugou leaned close to Shinso's desk and whispered something that made Shinso give him a glance and nod. Shinso recognized that Bakugou cared. Bakugou then returned to his seat with a curt sound. Tokoyami declared that he was aromantic and asexual, and the class cheered in support. Ojiro and Hagakure stood together to say that they were dating and that both were trans. Hagakure added firmly that she identified as a straight woman and was proud of that. Mina and Uraraka jumped up and down in celebration, shouting encouragement. Shiro grinned and called out a playful remark that made others smile. Ida rose with precise, mechanical gestures and said that he was omnigender and dating Shiro. The class stared in surprise, then burst into applause when Ida finished by saying that he was very proud of it. Uraraka and Mina hugged and celebrated wildly. Bakugou laughed at Ida's awkward choice of words, while Shiro looked delighted. Todoroki announced that he was gay and that Kirishima belonged to him. Kirishima blushed and responded with a bashful comment. Bakugou smirked, reached for Midoriya's hand, and pulled him close in an affectionate gesture that left Midoriya blushing. Uraraka shouted in excited astonishment. Many mouths in the classroom were open in surprise and delight, and Ida looked nearly faint with emotion. Bakugou asked the rest of the class, with a characteristic sneer, whether his demonstration had made things clear to everyone else. When the noise died down and everyone settled, Aizawa cleared his throat and, noting the date, told the students they could have the rest of the day off. Laughter and cheers followed. Aizawa joked in his dry way about enjoying the day and being responsible while celebrating. Students left the classroom in high spirits, flags and banners in hand, chatting as they went. As they passed Class 1B, Vlad dismissed them and let them join the others heading toward the dorms for a pride gathering. Minoma smiled at Aoyama as they joined the small parade down the school halls. As they walked, Bakugou whispered a teasing comment to Midoriya about nicknames. Midoriya laughed and smiled in return, answering Bakugou with a light-hearted remark about love being love. The words "love is love" were the first thing Midoriya saw as he walked into the dorms. Pride flags for every gender and sexuality adorned the walls and banisters. Rainbow pillows covered the couches and a tie-dye cloth dressed the coffee table. In the kitchen, a table of savory dishes stood next to a table of sweets, a giant layered rainbow cake, macarons, cupcakes with tiny pride flag toothpicks, and sugar cookies with rainbow icing, everything a group of teens could want. Extra couches filled the common room because classes 1B and 1C were visiting. The song "I Kissed a Girl" blared through the speakers and the up-next screen for the gay list glowed on the wall. A table of books, categorized by genre and all featuring LGBTQ representation, invited borrowing. YA fantasy such as Girls of Paper and Fire, teen queer romance like Red, White, and Royal Blue, guides to queer terminology, biographies of Marsha P. Johnson and other trans women of color, accounts of the Stonewall riots, horror collections like Her Body and Other Parties, and memoirs including Boy Erased. Above the TV, a list of movies and shows with representation was tacked to the wall. Midoriya had never felt happier. With a bowl of katsudon, his boyfriend, his classmates, and the rainbow-filled dorms, he had never felt more accepted. For the rest of the day and long into the night, classes 1A, 1B, and 1C hung out and celebrated being themselves. A few times people cried from happiness. Some told stories of unaccepting parents, which led others, including Midoriya, to call their own parents. Several families took steps toward acceptance. By the end of the night, Inko Midoriya found herself surrounded by 3 full classes of children and had decided she would bring them all cookies over the weekend. Midoriya leaned into Bakugou and they shared a quiet, affectionate moment. Bakugou offered Midoriya a soft smile and wished him a happy pride, and Midoriya returned the sentiment. Bakugou loved his boyfriend. Sometimes he wondered if he loved him too much. This was one of those times. Midoriya was determined to learn how to combine their quirks, the finger flick and Bakugou's explosions, to create a wave of explosive force. It had been a disaster so far. The angle, movement, and timing had to be perfect, and nothing ever seemed perfect. Midoriya outlined the plan. He would stand directly in front of Bakugou with Bakugou's arms around him, and Bakugou would form a circle with both hands, like his AP shot but shaped into a tunnel. As Bakugou initiated the explosion, Midoriya would flick to help direct the blast outward, mimicking Bakugou's other hand in the AP shot. Once they nailed that, they could work on moving it so it would sweep and cover more ground. Bakugou grunted his approval and called him a nerd. They got into position, Bakugou centered himself, and they unleashed the quirk combination. The result was a wide blast that covered a good portion of Jim Gamma, less concentrated than Bakugou's usual AP shot but still powerful. Aizawa, watching from the stands, almost gaped, suddenly glad he had decided to take a back seat during their training sessions. Midoriya and Bakugou celebrated. Their specialty move had finally worked. Now they only needed to perfect the sweeping motion to make it more controllable. They spent another 2 hours working on it with Aizawa's permission to stay late. They were energized, their fighting style was finally coming together. With the duo exams looming in a couple of weeks, they pressed Aizawa for more practice time, a request that was neither fully denied nor fully granted. Kirishima had been exhausted and hadn't slept well since the outing with Todoroki that neither of them wanted to call a date. He wanted nothing more than to curl up beside Todoroki and sleep, but he couldn't imagine just walking into Todoroki's room and asking. Instead, he made himself a cup of chamomile tea and headed back to the dorm. Todoroki was waiting for him there. Kirishima yawned as he entered and asked why Todoroki was there. Todoroki replied that he had come to see if Kirishima wanted to study and then admitted he was more curious about why Kirishima looked so tired. Kirishima confessed that he hadn't been able to sleep. Todoroki offered to leave, but Kirishima said he did not want him to. Kirishima unlocked his door and went inside, holding it open for Todoroki to follow. He sat on his bed and blinked, zoning out a little. Todoroki sat beside him, took the cup of tea and set it on the nightstand, then guided Kirishima to lie down and pulled the blanket over him. As Todoroki turned to leave, Kirishima tugged at his hand. Todoroki paused, thinking that cuddling might feel awkward in the morning, but he made an impulsive decision. He lay down next to Kirishima, pulled him close so his head rested on Todoroki's chest, and ran his fingers through Kirishima's hair until they both drifted toward sleep. Kirishima began to speak and then stopped. Todoroki reassured him that he did not have to say anything if he did not want to, but that he was there if Kirishima needed to talk. Kirishima admitted that he liked someone and wanted to confess, but he worried that the person did not feel the same. Todoroki listened, taking a breath as if steadying himself, and told Kirishima that he would never know unless he tried. Kirishima asked quietly what would happen if he lost that person by telling them. Todoroki told him that if their friendship was that close, he doubted he could ever lose them. Kirishima, on the verge of tears, said they had only just become friends and he was afraid of scaring them away. Todoroki reached up, brushed away a tear from Kirishima's cheek, and gently assured him that he doubted anyone could be driven away by him. Kirishima laughed softly, easing the tension. Todoroki then asked who it was that Kirishima liked. Kirishima bit his lip, stammered, and finally confessed that it was Todoroki. Todoroki froze, his face warming, and a small flame flickered on his shoulder. Kirishima immediately patted it out. Todoroki felt like he was melting and then, with a rush of relief, told Kirishima that he liked him too. Kirishima's eyes widened at the reply. Todoroki smiled more brightly than Kirishima had ever seen him smile, and Kirishima felt his heart quicken. Todoroki asked if Kirishima would like to go on a date with him, and Kirishima blushed and said he would love to. Books. The Eldest Curses Trilogy YA Fantasy. Follows Alec and Magnus. The first 2 books are The Red Scrolls of Magic and The Lost Book of the White. The third book is not yet published. 6 of Crows Duology YA Fantasy. A highly recommended duology in which Cur romance becomes prominent, particularly in the second book, Crooked Kingdom. Red Queen Series YA Fantasy. Cur representation appears later in the series. The relationship between 2 women is a meaningful element for many readers. A Court of Thorns and Roses and Throne of Glass YA Fantasy. Both series include Cur characters that appear deep into the storylines. Representation is limited but present across the books. Girls of Paper and Fire Trilogy YA Fantasy. Prominent Cur representation among the main characters. The third book is forthcoming. We Set the Dark on Fire YA Fantasy. Well regarded. A sequel is forthcoming. Percy Jackson, Heroes of Olympus, Trial of Apollo, Magnus Chase Juvenile Fantasy. Widely popular series recommended for readers of adventure and mythology. This book is gay Cur nonfiction. A comprehensive overview of LGBTQ terms and history that also discusses SXL topics in an informative manner. Boy Erased Cur Memoir. A memoir about a young man sent to conversion therapy. A year straight Cur Memoir. Follows a woman as she questions and explores her SXL identity. Red, White, and Royal Blue Cur Romance. A popular contemporary romance novel. Her Body and Other Parties Horror Short Stories. A collection of stories in which Cur themes appear alongside the central horror elements. A Fire and Stars YA fantasy. A tale of political duty and forbidden attraction between two women. A sequel is available. The Henna Wars YA romance. Nishat struggles with her family's expectations and her own identity when a childhood friend returns. Both Nishat and her friend enter a school business competition as henna artists, and their rivalry grows complicated by mutual attraction. What if it's us? Synopsis: Arthur is only in New York for the summer, and Broadway has taught him that the universe can deliver an unexpected, show-stopping romance. Ben thinks the universe should mind its own business. If it had his back, he would not be carrying a box of his ex-boyfriend's things to the post office. When Arthur and Ben have a meet-cute at the post office, the universe's intentions are uncertain. They get separated, then reunited. They struggle to get a first date right even after 3 do-overs. Arthur tries hard to make it work while Ben does not always try enough. Life may not follow the neat arcs of a Broadway play, but what if, somehow, it does? What if it is them? Real Cur America, LGBT stories from red states. Synopsis: 10 years earlier, Samantha Allen wore a suit and tie as a Mormon missionary. Now she is a GLAAD award-winning journalist happily married to another woman. Much in her life has changed, but her deep love for red state America and for Cur people who remain in so-called flyover country has not. In Real Cur America, Allen undertakes a cross-country road trip from Provo, Utah to the Rio Grande Valley, through the Bible Belt and the Deep South. Her guiding principle for the trip is finding something meaningful and affirming every day. Visiting drag shows, political rallies, and hubs of Cur life across the heartland, she introduces readers to extraordinary LGBTQ people working for change, from the first openly transgender mayor in Texas history to the manager of the only Cur nightclub in Bloomington, Indiana, among many others. The book captures profound cultural shifts in unexpected places and reveals a national network of chosen family fighting for a better world, offering uplifting stories and a source of hope. Not your sidekick. Synopsis: Welcome to Andover, where superpowers are common but internships are complicated. Jessica Tran is an ordinary high school student without powers, resigned to a life that will not match her heroic family legacy. She seeks a way to strengthen her college applications and finds a paid internship that seems perfect only to discover it is for the town's most notorious supervillain. On the upside, Jess gets to work alongside her longtime secret crush, Abby, whom she suspects keeps a secret of her own. She also feels a growing attraction to a fellow intern known only as M, who is never in the same place as Abby. What begins as a way to spite her superhero parents soon turns dangerous when Jess uncovers a plot that transcends the usual hero-villain conflicts. How to understand your gender. A practical guide for exploring who you are. Synopsis: For anyone who has ever wondered about their own gender identity or wanted to understand someone who is transgender or non-binary, this down-to-earth guide explains gender from biological, historical, and sociological perspectives and explores how gender shapes relationships with family, friends, partners, and strangers. It offers practical ways people can express their gender and helps readers understand lives different from their own. The book includes activities and reflection prompts to help people of all genders engage with gender diversity and apply the ideas to their own experiences. Kate Bornstein, author of Gender Outlaw, described this book as a smart, kind companion for calm, safe conversations about gender. Gender, a graphic guide. Synopsis: Is masculinity harmful in some forms? Why are public restrooms politically fraught? How has feminism reshaped available gender roles, and for whom? Why might challenging binary thinking about SEC and gender benefit everyone? In this illustrated guide, Megjon Barker and Jules Sheely trace changing understandings of gender across time and place, from concepts of masculinity and femininity to non-binary and trans identities, and to intersecting experiences shaped by race, sexuality, class, and disability. Addressing contemporary debates and tensions that can divide communities and even cost lives, the authors look to the past and the future to suggest how we might approach gender with more care and celebration. Ker, a graphic history. Synopsis: activist academic Megjon Barker and cartoonist Julia Sheely illuminate the histories of queer thought and LGBTQ+ activism in a groundbreaking non-fiction graphic novel. A cast of characters drawn from pop culture, film, activism, and academia guides readers through the ideas, people, and events that shaped queer theory. From identity politics and gender roles to privilege and exclusion, the book explores how views of sex, gender, and sexuality developed and how they intersect with culture, biology, psychology, and sexology. Key moments that shifted perceptions of normalcy are examined, including Alfred Kinsey's view of sexuality as a spectrum, Judith Butler's concept of gender performance, and cultural touchstones that invite new readings of familiar stories and figures. Juliet takes a breath. Synopsis: Juliet Milagros Palanti is leaving the Bronx and headed to Portland, Oregon. She has just come out to her family and is unsure if her mother will ever speak to her again. Determined to figure out what it means to be a Puerto Rican lesbian, she takes an internship with Harlow Brisbane, the author she admires for writing about feminism, women's bodies, and queer issues. Over the course of one transformative summer, Juliet confronts Portland, Harlow, and most importantly, herself as she tries to sort through who she is and what she wants. Tasty Pride: 75 recipes and stories from the queer food community. Tasty Pride is a collection of recipes and personal stories from queer cooks and culinary figures, including contributions from Ted Allen, Anita Lowe, and Rick Martinez. The Queen's English: a guide to modern queer slang, theoretical terms, and colloquialisms that define and celebrate LGBTQIA+ culture. Penguin Teen Pride YA must-reads. Last Night at the Telegraph Club. The Passing Playbook. Some Girls Do. The Girl I've Been. 4 White Girls. Stormbreak. Movies and Shows. The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson. A documentary about Marsha P. Johnson, a prominent figure in the Stonewall uprisings and an influential activist in the fight for LGBTQ+ rights. Available on Netflix. Disclosure: a documentary that shares the personal experiences of multiple transgender people and examines trans representation in media. A series in which a diverse team of queer experts travel to help people improve their lives through lifestyle, fashion, and personal coaching. Available on Netflix. Amend: The Fight for America. Hosted by Will Smith, this series explores the long and often dangerous struggle for civil rights in the United States through the lens of the 14th Amendment. Available on Netflix. A fantasy action animated series notable for its queer representation and strong themes of friendship and heroism. Available on Netflix. Set in 1987 New York, the series follows Blanca as she starts a new house and becomes a maternal figure to a talented dancer and a young woman navigating complicated relationships and the challenges of the era. Available on Netflix. Orange is the New Black. A story about a privileged New Yorker whose past decisions lead her to a women's prison, where she navigates friendships and rivalries among the inmates. Available on Netflix. A series in which 8 people around the world are psychically linked and begin to share experiences and emotions. It includes significant LGBTQ+ representation. Available on Netflix. Trinkets. A show about a grieving teenager who forms an unexpected bond with 2 classmates after they all end up in the same Shoplifters Anonymous group. The Half of It. A film about a girl who helps a classmate write love notes to another girl but finds herself developing feelings in the process. Available on Netflix. A New York Christmas Wedding. A holiday romance film in the Hallmark tradition. Available on Netflix. Alex Strangelove. A coming-of-age film about a high school student facing questions about his sexuality and identity. Available on Netflix. A musical film featuring themes of self-discovery and youthful celebration, its soundtrack has been noted for resonant songs. Available on Netflix. The class was buzzing. Everyone had read Yue's tweet on the hero duos, but no one could figure out who the second pairing was. They all knew Kaminari had convinced Shinso to form a duo with him, but no one else had revealed plans. Mina suggested they might be from Class 1B. Ida agreed that was a very plausible idea. Aoyama shook his head and said that, from what he had heard, it did not seem so, addressing the others with a flourish. Mina asked how he would know. Aoyama smiled and explained that he had his ways. When Mina pressed for specifics, Aoyama revealed that he had learned it from his boyfriend. The class reacted in surprise. Mina told Aoyama she would start taking French lessons if he told her who his source was. Aoyama warned her to be serious and added that cheese tastings would be part of the lessons. Bakugou threw up his hands and said, exasperated, that Aoyama had gotten the information from his boyfriend. Everyone turned to Bakugou in surprise. Aoyama put a hand over his chest and remarked that he had not been told Bakugou spoke French. Bakugou glared and said he had not wished to invite a conversation about it. Mina said they could return to Bakugou's language skills and Aoyama's personal life later, but for now she needed to know how accurate Aoyama's information was. Aoyama assured her it was very precise. Midoriya decided to assume that meant very and moved on, noting that it still did not reveal who the duo was. Ida suggested that if they did not know, they should stay out of it until the pair announced themselves. Uraraka asked if he was not curious. Ida insisted that if they did not know, it was probably for a reason. Mina and Uraraka opened their mouths to respond, but Aizawa entered the classroom and they all fell silent, musing over the mystery during the entire lesson. After class, Mina, Uraraka, and several other curious classmates cornered Aoyama for details about his boyfriend, which allowed Bakugou and Midoriya to slip away. Once they were far enough, they laughed at how easily they had avoided suspicion. Bakugou smiled and said they had been clever. Midoriya agreed and noted that nobody had expected them to be a duo, especially after Todoroki had commented they were the least likely pairing the first day the duos were announced. Bakugou bristled at Todoroki's remark. Midoriya reminded him that they did not have a reputation for getting along, and then grabbed Bakugou's arm to add that it would make an even bigger impression when they showed how well they could work together. Bakugou smirked and conceded the point, then the two set off to train. Monoma really wanted to be a hero. He recognized that provoking the class favorites, the leaders of the rival groups, had been a very foolish thing to do. It had taken him 2 weeks to convince Nizu, Aizawa, and Vlad to give him a second chance, and that reprieve depended on his completing an anti-bullying class, doing community service, and accepting a probationary PRD if he was allowed back. Monoma agreed to the terms. The anti-bullying class turned out to be one of the best experiences of his time at UA because it brought in students who were dramatic and expressive. One particular Class 1A student had an especially theatrical flair, and Monoma regretted the way he had made Class 1A dislike him. That student could be petty in ways Monoma did not expect, and Monoma found himself on the receiving end of that pettiness more than once. As Monoma continued therapy alongside the anti-bullying classes, he gradually became closer to that Class 1A student. They began to hang out on weekends sometimes, and Monoma grew accustomed to bringing him cheese every Friday. Their friendship endured after Monoma completed the class with top marks, and over time they quietly became a couple. Monoma prepared to return to UA in Class 1C, with the possibility of moving back up to Class 1B in his second year. He had already apologized to Classes 1B and 1C, but knew he would not be able to speak to Class 1A until his first day back. Monoma hoped the reception would not be too harsh. Monoma was shaking. He really did not want to do this. He checked his watch for the 1000th time and leaned his head back against the wall. I can do this, he thought, breathing out slowly. He pictured Aoyama's encouraging smile, the kiss on the cheek he had given him that morning, and the whispered reassurance meant to steady him. Monoma worried about how their relationship would be received. Maybe it would be better not to make a fuss about it, he thought. If Class 1A reacted badly because of their romance, Monoma did not think he would be able to forgive himself. Present Mike placed a hand on Monoma's shoulder and told him it was time. Monoma opened the classroom door. He watched Aoyama give him an encouraging smile while the faces of Class 1A fell into various expressions, Bakugou and Midoriya looking particularly hostile. Monoma swallowed hard and steadied himself. Monoma announced that he was there to apologize. Bakugou glared at him and demanded aggressively what this rabid mess was doing in their class. Monoma explained that he had come to apologize. He admitted that his words and actions had been out of line, that jealousy over Class 1A receiving most of the attention had overtaken him, and that he had taken it too far. He specifically addressed Bakugou and Midoriya, saying he regretted calling Bakugou a villain and suggesting Midoriya had only advanced because of All Might's favor. He told them he knew those claims were wrong and that he hoped they would understand. Class 1A sat stunned and speechless. Midoriya asked what Monoma meant by saying they were forgotten. Monoma blinked at the question and elaborated. He explained that Class 1A received the majority of the attention at UA attacks, praise, expectations to win, and that other classes were often overlooked. He asked whether people had forgotten that Kirishima and Tetsu had been evenly matched at the sports festival, or that Shinso had nearly bested Midoriya and had beaten Ojiro. Monoma said he had been frustrated by being pushed aside and that frustration had led him to lash out at Class 1A, for which he apologized. Bakugou objected bluntly that it was because they were Class A, asserting their standing. Midoriya told Bakugou to be quiet and then thanked Monoma, explaining that it might take time to forgive but that he appreciated the apology and the explanation. He admitted he had not realized how much Class 1B had been sidelined. Monoma nodded in thanks and said he would be around before leaving, prompting many students in Class 1A to reconsider how they treated other classes. Later, Midoriya and Bakugou returned from training unusually quiet. Bakugou acknowledged, with reluctant frustration, that Monoma had been right and Class 1B did get overshadowed a lot. Midoriya agreed and suggested they could try interacting with the other classes more during in-class training or at lunch. Bakugou grumbled that he was not going to give up their training time, but admitted they could try being friendlier when possible. Midoriya laughed and, in a lighter mood, guided Bakugou back to the dorms to study together. At lunch, Bakugou tried to be polite but tensions made it difficult, and he left early. Midoriya excused himself from his conversation with Kendo and went to find Bakugou on the roof, where Bakugou sat in their usual spot. Midoriya smiled and sat beside him, leaning his head on Bakugou's shoulder. Bakugou glanced sideways and rested his head gently on Midoriya's in return. Midoriya thanked him and said he understood why Bakugou had left earlier. Bakugou offered a small, grateful smile and told Midoriya he appreciated being understood. Bakugou then turned to Midoriya and, meeting his gaze, told him that he loved him. Midoriya's face flushed, and tears of happiness pricked his eyes as he told Bakugou that he loved him too. Bakugou responded with a tender, chaste forehead touch and pulled Midoriya into a warm embrace. They held each other quietly on the roof, content and comforted, before eventually heading back inside to study together. Contrary to popular belief, Todoroki knew some of his theories might not be correct. He had not expected his theory about Midoriya dating someone to be the one that turned out true. He had been secretly hoping it would be the theory that he was a robot instead of his father's son, but not all wishes came true. He had not been looking for evidence. He only wanted some cold soba and to ask Mr. Aizawa who the second hero duo was. He did not mean to stumble on Midoriya and Bakugou's training. He certainly did not expect to find Bakugou pinning Midoriya to the ground with their faces very close. It was not a sight he wanted to see. He turned around immediately and walked back to the dorms, passing Uraraka, who looked like she was about to ask him a question, and went straight into his room, feeling utterly stunned. Then he let out an involuntary, sharp sound. Kirishima had been thinking about cuddles. When he saw Todoroki enter the dorms and head for his room, he slipped out of the common room to join him. He was not expecting to hear a shriek come from his boyfriend's door. Kirishima rushed to the door, used the spare key Todoroki had given him, and pushed it open. Todoroki sat on the bed with his jaw hanging open, frozen. Kirishima called to him by his pet name and asked if he was okay, closing the door behind him. Todoroki declared that his theory had been right and that they were dating. When Kirishima asked who he meant, Todoroki hesitated and then refused to say, thinking about how much trouble Midoriya could cause if he revealed anything without permission. Todoroki explained, with a nervous streak, that he did not want to face any retaliation or a disappointed stare. Kirishima stared for a moment, then suggested cuddles. Todoroki opened his arms, and Kirishima climbed in. They lay on the bed, curled into one another, softly smiling. Kirishima's concern eased as he began to drift to sleep in Todoroki's arms. Todoroki relaxed as well, but his mind still spun at the idea that Bakugou and Midoriya had been so close. In the end, Kirishima's warmth was comforting enough for both of them to fall asleep. Bakugou liked seeing his boyfriend blush when he was pinned under him. There was something satisfying about watching Midoriya's wide eyes and bright color when they trained like this. Sometimes Bakugou suspected Midoriya let himself get flustered on purpose, and while that bruised his pride a little, he enjoyed the moment too much to care. He smirked down at Midoriya and thought about how he would like to capture the scene somehow. A brief, neutral moment bridged what happened next. Midoriya called out to him and asked if he was going to get off. Bakugou decided to stay where he was for a little longer. Midoriya flushed and complained softly beneath him, and Bakugou smiled. He was well aware how much he cared for his boyfriend. Midoriya was lost in thought. He reviewed past duo exam matches, noticing a changing pattern in how many heroes and which heroes were used. He wondered if Nizu chose opponents based on more personal factors. If that were true, there was someone he needed to find. Tokoyami was surprised when Midoriya knocked on his door. They were friends who sometimes had floor sleepovers, but the look on Midoriya's face was unlike his usual excited request for a sleepover, and Tokoyami couldn't quite place it. Midoriya asked Tokoyami how much he knew about Hawks, and Tokoyami was more than helpful, assuming Midoriya's interest was for his hero notes. Midoriya thanked him and left his dorm with a quiet smile, heading for Uraraka's room next. Uraraka opened the door and was happy to see him, but stopped short at the look on his face. Midoriya asked Uraraka to teach him a few moves she had learned from Gunhead. By the time Midoriya was satisfied with what she taught him, Uraraka was sweaty and panting, but glad to have helped. She waved him off with a smile, still wondering why he had suddenly taken an interest in Gunhead. Todoroki was not expecting Midoriya to burst into his room without knocking. His surprise shifted to mild concern when he saw Midoriya's expression. Midoriya asked Todoroki if he could call him Shaken, explaining that they had been friends a while and Todoroki was one of his best friends. Todoroki agreed as long as he could call Midoriya Izuken. Midoriya grinned and sealed the agreement with a hug. Todoroki smiled slightly and they settled into a conversation, which turned toward Midoriya asking questions about his father's quirk. Midoriya ran down the hall to find Kirishima, notebook in hand, and asked Kirishima about his work with Fat Gum. He ended up learning more than he expected about Fat Gum and, unexpectedly, about Crimson Riot. Kirishima's enthusiastic fanboying and first-hand experiences gave Midoriya insights he hadn't considered. He left Kirishima on the elevator, waving goodbye with a grin. Jiru noticed Midoriya approaching with an intense energy that made her unsure whether he was about to burst into a burst of emotion or give someone an overenthusiastic hug. She set her concern aside when he asked for her help completing a thorough analysis of present mix quirk. Since she had personal experience with sound-based quirks, her input was valuable and she was happy to help. Aizawa needed more coffee. Midoriya had cornered him after class, besieging him with questions about quirks, some of which even Aizawa did not immediately know the answers to. It got worse when Midoriya asked to spar, and though Aizawa felt the beginnings of a headache, he stepped onto the training grounds prepared for an intense session with his determined student. Bakugou watched with concern as Midoriya ran around the school, questioning a majority of their classmates. Bakugou found the sight half amusing, especially at the wary faces of Izumi and Denki when Midoriya fired off questions about their quirks. He could almost hear the gears turning in Midoriya's head. What puzzled Bakugou more was why Midoriya kept asking about hypothetical tweaks to quirks' familiar, but distinctly altered versions and why those hypothetical changes felt oddly recognizable. Midoriya seemed almost electric. He mumbled plans at a rapid pace and wrote so quickly his notebook filled page after page. He grinned as he pieced together strategies for countering different heroes. In his mind, he and Kaken were going to win, they would be a duo, and they would master the exam. Bakugou had a hard time containing his smirk. The hero duo exams had taken place that afternoon and still no one had figured out that Izuku Midoriya and he were the second duo. The situation amused him immensely, and although he wanted to shout to anyone who would listen that the Wonder Duo would be the best, he kept silent. He allowed himself only occasional, performative commands for everyone to be quiet, dismissing the idea that some extras were competing in the exam so he would not appear suspicious. It did not help that every time Bakugou told someone to shut up, Izuku quietly giggled behind him. Bakugou felt Izuku's excitement like a warm current and could tell how much the other boy believed the whole thing was hilarious. The giggles made it harder not to smile, but Bakugou forced himself to maintain a neutral face so their plan would not be exposed. He shivered slightly at the sight of Izuku's notebook. Midoriya was writing in it, as always, and Bakugou knew this time the pages contained perfected strategies for taking down a variety of heroes and hero teams. He had read all the drafts of those plans and could not imagine them getting much better, though he also knew Izuku could always improve them. Sometimes he worried for the safety of everyone if those plans fell into the wrong hands. Despite that worry, Bakugou could not have been more excited. Izuku was equally eager, and Shinso and Kaminari shared in the tension and anticipation, even if the two had been slightly shaken by Midoriya's insistence on keeping them silent. Aizawa observed his students and was surprised by how convincing their acting was. None of the other students had even remotely guessed that these two were the second duo. They did not sense the dangerous, excited aura that clung to Bakugou and Midoriya. Instead, the others teased Bakugou as usual and spoke to Midoriya casually. They surrounded Shinso and Kaminari, all chatting about the exam, oblivious to the glances exchanged between the Wonder Duo. No one paid attention to the notebook on Midoriya's desk. Aizawa had peeked at it a week earlier and was very glad he was not one of the heroes who might face those plans. He had no desire to know how far Midoriya had progressed since then. Shinso felt anxious in the crowded room. Kaminari happily chatted with the rest of Class 1A, who were all excited for the exam, but Shinso was unused to so much attention and disliked it. That aversion to attention was why he had wanted to be an underground hero, and he was surprised when Kaminari expressed a desire to go underground as well and to be his partner. Hearing Kaminari's reasoning, Shinso found it made sense. Kaminari's quirk could easily draw the spotlight, but the underground heroes saved those who were forgotten, and Kaminari wanted to help those people. It was one of the reasons Shinso liked Kaminari, though he would not say so in front of everyone. Midoriya glanced at the clock every 4 minutes and 55 seconds, and while he did not understand why he had such precise timing, he could not help it. He watched the seconds tick down and kept track of Aizawa's furtive glances and the way Shinso kept scanning the room and tapping his leg. They were all nervous, though Bakugou and Midoriya could not show it if their plan was to work. And then it was time. Shinso stood in the exam waiting room with Kaminari, breathing slowly to keep from panicking. Their exam would start in less than 5 minutes, and they still did not know who they were facing. He almost wished Bakugou and Midoriya were going first, if only to avoid having to follow whatever chaotic show they would put on. He glanced at Kaminari and found the other boys smiling broadly. The sight eased some of the tension in him. Kaminari always seemed to calm him, sometimes without meaning to. Present Mike announced over the speakers that the first hero duo was Thunderstorm, made up of Charge Bolt, the Lightning Rod, and Siren, the thunder that followed. Shinso and Kaminari stood in front of the stadium doors. Kaminari squeezed Shinso's hand and told him that they had this. Shinso returned the sentiment quietly. They walked out into a forest terrain. Trees surrounded them, blocking the view of classmates in the stands. Present Mick's voice then called the villains, Hawks and Merkio. Shinso and Kaminari exchanged a look. They had not expected Hawks and Merkio. Shinso admitted he did not really know who he had expected, but this was not it. He told Kaminari that they needed a plan and outlined his assessment. Hawks talked more and depended on ranged attacks, while Merkio relied on hand-to-hand combat. If Shinso could get Hawks to respond and stay still long enough to put cuffs on him, they should be fine. Kaminari suggested he could electrocute Merkio if she attacked, then cuff her while she was down. Shinso agreed, warning Kaminari to make it a glancing hit so Kaminari himself would not end up down longer than their opponent. Shinso pulled Kaminari to the ground as one of Hawks's feathers struck a tree behind them. Hawks landed and asked if they were ready. The answer in Shinso's head was no, he was not ready. Hawks advanced while Siren ducked under twin feather blades. Shinso glanced at Chargebolt, who kept one eye on the fight and the other on the surroundings, searching for openings to shock Hawks. Merkio had not appeared yet. Siren drew the twin daggers Eraserhead had gifted him. He would have preferred a different weapon but would not complain. Neither Hawks nor Siren showed signs of tiring. Siren's goal was to prolong the exchange. As long as neither landed a decisive blow, Hawks could not win. Hawks dodged left, creating a slight opening that allowed Shinso to slash with a dagger. A smile crossed his face and vanished when Merkio entered the fray. Siren called for a switch and rolled to take Chargebolt's place, fighting Merkio. He faced her, wary of her legs. One well-placed kick could put him out of commission, and he could not allow that. He taunted her with a drawl about being Hawks's lucky charm. Merkio charged, furious at the implication that she existed only as a pretty face, and Shinso noted her annoyance. He dodged and rolled away from a kick and felt the connection with her snap into place, but he could not reveal his activation requirements yet. After a brief hop on the ball of his feet, he slipped into control and mentally instructed her to take down Hawks. He sheathed his daggers as Merkio turned toward the fight between Chargebolt and Hawks. Shinso watched Chargebolt dodge and then stumble as Merkio came in from the side and kicked Hawks back. Siren ran to Chargebolt while Merkio and Hawks grappled. He unfolded his metal bow staff, its mechanism clicking into place, and thought he should thank Mei for the design. He grabbed Chargebolt and told him to charge when their opponents were touching so the shock could hit both, or to try hitting Merkio if he could not reach both. Chargebolt's eyes shone with determination as he confirmed they would act on Shinso's count. Merkio slammed a fist into Hawks's side as the trio moved into position. Hawks reacted and swung a feather. Merkio moved to wrestle it from his grasp. On Shinso's count, Chargebolt struck, sending a charge down the bow staff that dazed Hawks and toppled Merkio. Shinso felt his connection snap, and he quickly snapped quirk-suppressant cuffs onto Merkio's wrists. A feather swung toward Chargebolt and he grabbed it, channeling an electrical charge that brought Hawks to his knees. Shinso helped Merkio to her feet and watched as Chargebolt secured cuffs onto a sluggish Hawks. He could not hide the small upward twitch of his mouth as Chargebolt steadied Hawks to stand. Present Mike announced that the heroes had won and congratulated Thunderstorm on passing their exam. Merkio smiled and praised them, suggesting she would like to have them intern with her sometimes to practice hand-to-hand combat and intimidation. Kaminari cheered that she never took interns. Merkio protested and said she had tried to recruit others in the past. The exchange turned lighthearted. Hawks joined in with a laugh. Shinso commented that Merkio seemed more the type of person to suit some candidates than others, and Merkio and Hawks laughed at the jab. Shinso rested an arm on Kaminari's shoulders. Kaminari's wide smile made his heart beat faster, and he smiled in return when Midoriya collided into them, followed by the rest of their class. Midoriya cheered that they had done great. Classmates praised their performance and urged the Class 1A hero duo to show they could beat Class 1Bs. Mina tossed in a playful encouragement, hands on her hips and beaming. Shinso shook his head at the enthusiasm, thinking that some of them did not know everything that had happened. Bakugou caught his eye and gave a short, approving remark calling him eyebags, barely audible above the students. Shinso thought that indeed, some things were still unknown to others. The excitement in the air was tangible. Bakugou and Midoriya slipped away during Shinso and Kaminari's congratulations and made their way to the waiting room for their own battle. Their pinkies were intertwined, and they exchanged soft smiles and looks of steady determination. They were going to crush this exam together and show everyone how effective they were as a duo. Their classmates and opponents would not know what hit them. Midoriya felt more than excited. With Merkio and Hawks no longer options for their fight, the chance that they would face the opponent he most wanted to beat had grown. From Katsuki's little glances, Midoriya guessed his friend's eager anticipation was noticeable. Katsuki narrowed his eyes and called Midoriya a nerd, then asked what he was planning. Midoriya smiled innocently and said it was nothing out of the ordinary. Katsuki pressed for details, and Midoriya named the plan he had in mind, the vengeful one. Katsuki asked what that was, and Midoriya admitted Katsuki was mostly in the loop. Katsuki opened his mouth to demand more when Present Mix's voice cut through the room and announced the next duo, Deku and Dynamite. Todoroki choked on his food as half the class spat out what they had been eating and gaped at the cityscape outside where Midoriya and Bakugou had entered. Ida's voice urged everyone to quiet down and be respectful of their classmates' choice to form a hero duo, even if it surprised anyone. Todoroki could barely focus. He was certain he had seen Midoriya and Bakugou together at that cafe, and the whole Amanda ploy now looked like something they were coordinating. Todoroki could not imagine the two dating, but he would not put it past them to pull a fast one on everyone. Present Mike announced the villains for the match, and Todoroki braced for the fight. The villains were Mount Lady and Endeavor. Midoriya grinned at the reveal. This was exactly who he wanted to face, Endeavor. Mount Lady could be handled quickly. She was inexperienced and showed several weaknesses in the news footage. She also seemed more focused on public image than hero work, in Midoriya's opinion. He flashed a manic grin at Bakugou and explained their plan. Mount Lady first, Endeavor second. He labeled the Endeavor step as Plan Z. Bakugou snapped his head to him and asked what Plan Z was. Midoriya replied that it was psychological warfare. Bakugou paled. This could end badly or epically, probably both. The sound of large footsteps warned them of Mount Lady's approach. Midoriya nodded to Bakugou and zipped to the rooftops while Bakugou ran toward the street, creating controlled explosions to keep Mount Lady's attention on the ground instead of on Midoriya above. Bakugou saw her before she saw him and used his explosions to get to face level, detonating a larger blast in her direction to force her to lean back. Simultaneously, he watched the blur of green Midoriya with a telephone pole in hand smash into the back of Mount Lady's knees, sending the giant off balance and falling backward. Bakugou grinned as she went down. He hoped Midoriya's theory about a time limit on her giant form was correct. Otherwise, restraining her would be difficult. He wrapped rope from his belt around her ankles to keep her from shifting back into giant form easily, remembering Midoriya's insistence on carrying rope. It might be enough. Todoroki watched Midoriya and Bakugou handle Mount Lady with surprising ease. They had not yet secured the cuffs, but they restrained her effectively. Todoroki kept one eye on his father. Endeavor had not attacked yet, but Todoroki assumed his father could not move as fast as the giant. That concern was confirmed seconds later when Todoroki saw fire bloom across the concrete, racing toward Midoriya and striking Mount Lady's torso. Todoroki grimaced. Even as a villain, his father still struggled to coordinate well with others. Midoriya dodged, leaving Mount Lady to take the brunt of the flames. Todoroki watched as Mount Lady shifted back to her normal size and barely evaded another burst of fire. Mount Lady was quickly subdued after that, Bakugou using the distraction to snap cuffs on her and take her out. Todoroki found it almost pathetic that his father's mistake had made the arrest possible. Midoriya was pleased. Mount Lady had gone down quickly, and Endeavor now looked flustered. He told Endeavor that he should pay more attention to his partners, and suggested that if Endeavor had been more attentive he might avoid so many mistakes. Midoriya added, based on what Todoroki had shared with him, that Endeavor did not even pay attention to his own children unless it benefited his career or his desire to beat All Might. He flipped over the oncoming flames and signaled Bakugou with an OK gesture. Bakugou blasted Endeavor from the side while Endeavor remained focused on Midoriya, creating the opening they needed. Endeavor stumbled backwards. From a nearby rooftop, Midoriya called out that Endeavor might not reach the #1 hero spot, but could top the charts for casualties, property destruction, and villain brutality. Todoroki wasn't laughing. Not because he didn't find it hilarious, but because if he laughed he'd miss the greatest roasting of his SPRM donor he'd ever seen. He was shaking to keep his laughter in. From the corner of his eye, he saw the rest of the class looking horrified at Midoriya's taunts. None of it was untrue, which was probably why his SPRM donor looked so mad. It got better as Midoriya began listing casualty and destruction numbers and comparing them to other heroes. Todoroki had realized Endeavor was bad, but he hadn't realized he was that bad. Midoriya's strategy was working. Endeavor focused on Midoriya, who, amid his taunts, jumped into the fight at random, usually after a direct attack from Bakugou, striking openings created by Bakugou's moves. Todoroki realized he'd never seen two people work together so seamlessly. They weren't talking, barely looking at each other, yet their attacks were perfectly in sync. It was a flawless storm of fire and lightning with a steady stream of taunts. Aizawa couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. On one hand, his problem duo were working together perfectly, quickly and effectively taking down Mount Lady and going head-to-head with Endeavor. On the other hand, Midoriya was taunting the number 2 hero directly, using accurate statistics to push Endeavor's buttons. Aizawa hadn't known the student had that much sass. He had seen their training and them sparring, but this against the number 2 hero was on a different level. He watched as Endeavor unleashed a blast that forced the two to back off, as Endeavor landed a kick that sent Midoriya flying, and as Bakugou flew after him, grabbing his hand. Bakugou pulled him so Midoriya's trajectory shifted toward Endeavor. They spun in the air, Bakugou striking first with a double explosion that sent Endeavor backwards. Bakugou slipped from view and Endeavor stumbled. Then Midoriya hit with his full cowl activated like a crushing whip, sending Endeavor crashing. Bakugou grinned as he watched his partner slam into Endeavor at blistering speed. He was pretty sure that move could have been devastating, though he doubted his partner cared. He landed beside his companion as the dust cleared. Endeavor was down. Bakugou shared a grin with his partner before they moved in to secure the number 2 hero. His partner snapped cuffs onto Endeavor's wrists and Bakugou checked for a pulse, which he found. With that done, Bakugou turned to his partner, aware of their classmates' attention and hearing present might declare their win. This was their moment. Izuku agreed. They shared a brief, private moment together before gathering themselves. Their classmates were still screaming as they exited the exam arena and were immediately surrounded by questions and congratulations. Most of their classmates were stunned by the seamless partnership alone, let alone the personal connection between them. Todoroki stared with an unreadable expression, and when the class calmed slightly he surprised them by approaching and smiling. Izuku smiled back and the two of them burst into laughter. Todoroki wheezed that Midoriya was his new favorite person. Kirishima pouted and protested. Todoroki turned to Aizawa and begged him to have recorded the whole thing, even offering to pay. Aizawa rolled his eyes but nodded, sending the class into another fit of cheers and laughter. Izuku felt Bakugou's arm wrap around his waist and looked up at him, returning a soft smile. Bakugou offered a small, affectionate gesture and they shared a relieved smile. They had done it. They were going to be partners in hero work, and Izuku couldn't have been happier. Uraraka cheered with the rest of the class and smiled as she congratulated Deku and Bakugou on their relationship. Quietly, though, she felt a small, persistent ache. She had hoped Deku might love her, that he might look at her the way he looked at Bakugou. Hours after the exams, in the privacy of her dorm room, the tears returned, but she reminded herself that it would take time and she would get over it. Deku was happy, and that was what mattered. She could find someone else. Maybe one day she would help with his wedding. She wiped her eyes and let the thought steady her. 3 years after high school, Katsuki felt the kind of nervousness that would not be settled by anything short of the moment itself. He and Izuku had debuted as the Wonder Duo and had climbed to the top quickly. In 3 years they had become the number 1 and 2 heroes. Being number 2 was fine, as long as it was beside Izuku. Katsuki had wanted to take this step for a long time. He had almost done it more than once after the Hero Duo exam, after their debut, and on countless days since graduation, but he had waited for the right moment. Tonight was the Hero Gala, the night they would be officially announced as the new number 1 and 2 heroes, and he had decided this was the moment. Izuku felt his own nerves in a small, bright way. They had arrived together, as always. The announcement had passed without him breaking down, at least not visibly. Now the first dance of the gala was beginning, and the cameras and guests were trained on them. They had never hidden their relationship, but they had not made a grand display of it either. All Izuku wanted in that moment was to dance with Katsuki. Izuku took Katsuki's hand and asked if he wanted to dance, voice small and earnest. Katsuki smiled down and answered that he would love to. As they stepped onto the dance floor, the cameras and the crowd faded away from Izuku's focus. Katsuki wrapped an arm around his waist and guided his hand to his shoulder, and they moved together to the music, twirling and stepping in time. At one point, Katsuki twirled Izuku and let go, and Izuku turned back with a brilliant smile, then froze when he saw Katsuki kneeling. Katsuki's cheeks were flushed, and he looked nervous in a way that made his eyes soft. He asked Izuku to marry him. Izuku's hand moved to the secret pocket Anti-Mitsuki had sewn into the inside of his suit jacket. He took out a small black box that matched the one Katsuki held and opened it before him, answering that he would, but only if Katsuki would as well. Katsuki's smile grew wider than Izuku had ever seen, and tears slipped down his face. He stood and took the ring, placing it on Izuku's finger, then let Izuku place the matching ring on his own. Katsuki told Izuku that of course he would, then lifted him into his arms, the boxes falling to the floor and forgotten. Izuku cried and smiled at the same time as Katsuki held him. They shared a tender, joyful moment together, certain that they would be together always. Enji heard an incessant beeping in the background. He did not remember setting an alarm. The last clear sound he could recall was All Might coughing up blood. He opened his eyes and closed them again against the brightness of the room, then blinked until he could keep them open under the fluorescent lights. He realized he was in a hospital and used the bed control to lift himself upright. He was in the general public ward, the usual golden hero stripes replaced by the dark blue of ordinary patients. He swore under his breath at the sight. He tried to piece together why he was there. He remembered agreeing to help with the hero duo exams and being partnered with the big, troublesome hero in training. He remembered facing the green, bone-breaking boy and the feral explosion boy. He even remembered someone shouting an insult at him. The memories blurred with irritation and disbelief. The door opened. Nizu entered first, followed by a police detective and a representative from the Hero Commission. The commission representative nodded toward him and addressed him as Endeavor. Enji demanded to know why he had been placed in the general public ward. Nizu smiled and commented that Enji was being exceptionally blunt. Nizu explained that anyone without a hero license and who was not a student at a hero school was sent to the general ward unless they had been caught in an upper-level villain attack. Enji asserted that he was a hero. The commission representative then informed him that footage from the exams had been leaked. Nizu added that the press had verified the statistics that Midoriya had mentioned, which the public had not seen before, and had rioted as a result. The commission representative announced that Enji had been stripped of his hero license the day before. Enji protested that only a few hours had passed since the exam. The commission representative corrected him. It had been 3 days, and Midoriya's last hit had knocked him out and given him a concussion. Enji gaped, insisting that they could not revoke his hero license. Nizu told him that they already had and warned that any heroic acts he attempted would now be treated as vigilantism and could lead to arrest. He barely registered the rest of what they said. His hero license was gone. He was no longer officially a hero. The three of them left the room shortly afterward, and Enji could not shake the suspicion that the green boy had been the cause. A notification on his phone interrupted his thoughts. It was from Shoto. Shoto had sent a string of short, sometimes mocking messages. Shoto said he liked Midoriya and loved that person platonically, that he had enjoyed Enji's performance in the exam but liked Midoriya's more, that Enji's hero card had been revoked and that this was good, that authorities were going to investigate him, that Shoto's mother would be released from the hospital, and that Tuya had returned out of spite. The messages continued with comments about breaking merchandise, a classroom poster, and a mocking effigy in the school courtyard. Enji threw his phone.